Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pamela Mastropietro. Pamela Mastropietro was born on August 23, 1999 in Rome, Italy. From a young age, she struggled with anxiety and gullibility. She had trouble interacting with her peers, and family issues only made things more challenging for her. However, in these difficult circumstances, she gradually began to find her strength again. As she grew older, Pamela exhibited some unusual behaviors. She faced emotional instability and had difficulties in school, even though she was intelligent. Over time, her self-esteem was severely affected, causing many difficulties in her life. Eventually, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She hung out with a bad group of friends who introduced her to alcohol. Pamela quickly became addicted to alcohol because under the influence of this drink, she felt freer and lighter, temporarily forgetting her problems. Pamela's parents are very worried and want to help their daughter, but they cannot focus entirely on her because they have to work a lot. As a result, Pamela began to face more serious issues. Although she initially managed to address some of her problems, things took a turn for the worse when she met a 20-year-old man from Romania. This relationship raised red flags from the start. Unlike her previous friends, this new relationship led Pamela to engage in regular substance use. She ignored her family's advice, and their worries soon became a reality. Pamela used substances only when she was with her boyfriend, but after a few months, he vanished, leaving her to deal with her problems alone. The situation worsened and led to a critical condition. Fortunately, her parents acted promptly. On October 18, 2017, 18 years old, Pamela was admitted to a rehabilitation center in Macerata for 3 months. Her parents, Alessandra Verni and Stefano Mastropietro, were shocked when they learned about their daughter's problem. They tried to help her in every way and hoped that after her stay at the center, she would return to a normal life. They believed that the center would closely monitor patients and restrict access to drugs. However, they were mistaken. In fact, she was only partially restricted and could leave the center at any time, despite the curfew. According to Pamela, she felt more comfortable there because there were other people going through similar situations. This made it easier for her to find understanding and support. On January 31, 2018, photos of Pamela surfaced in the media, just hours after her disappearance. At that time, she was in the final stage of a rehabilitation program and had developed friendships with the staff and other young residents at the facility. These friends were among the first individuals the police contacted after her parents reported her missing. They said Pamela's situation was worrying, suggesting she was struggling with addiction and her condition had deteriorated. Unfortunately, completing a rehabilitation program is unlikely to bring about positive change. Meanwhile, Pamela's parents reached out to several television channels to report their daughter's disappearance, urging the public for assistance and offering a reward for information. Concerns were mounting, especially as the police had not found Pamela in the 2 days since she was reported missing. A witness reported seeing 2 suitcases with a foul odor dumped next to a ditch near a house on Promyślenie Street, a few kilometers from where Pamela lived. When the police arrived and examined the suitcases, they discovered the body parts of a young woman inside. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Pamela Mastropietro, and one of the suitcases was identified as hers. Pamela's parents heard the shocking news on the radio, but couldn't believe it until law enforcement officers visited them in the evening to share the tragic discovery. Her mother was extremely distressed. She had always hoped her daughter would overcome her struggles and achieve her dreams. Now those hopes were shattered. Police later discovered that Pamela had spent her final days at a rehabilitation center. This is where their investigation began. According to people at the rehabilitation center, Pamela had made plans to meet someone and intended to leave. Security cameras confirmed that she left the center in the evening, carrying a suitcase and possibly attempting to escape with her belongings. No one attempted to stop her. After leaving, she went to a nearby train station, where she was again caught on camera getting into a car with a local taxi driver, Lucky Awalima. The driver, a 45-year-old man from a neighboring area, reported that he had taken her to the station after she missed her train to Rome. He dropped her off and left, unaware of what happened to her afterward. Pamela then decided to contact another taxi driver, who was also later approached by the police. In a rush, he agreed to help her and took her to his home. The next morning, she missed her chance to board the train, so instead she requested a ride to a park in Macerata. There, she encountered a drug dealer from Nigeria named Desmond Lucky. The police spoke to him, and he said that Pamela had paid him with a silver necklace her mother had given her. After meeting with Desmond, she left the park and went to a pharmacy a few streets away. The pharmacist reported that she entered the store with a suitcase and purchased a syringe. Security cameras captured her image. Video footage showed a man following her, later identified as Innocent Osagale, a 30-year-old Nigerian citizen who had been in Italy illegally since 2014. He had recently dropped out of a refugee aid program and had become involved in drug trafficking. This made him the main suspect in Pamela's disappearance and other crimes. Investigators feared she may have left with him, possibly intending to buy and use illegal drugs. The police quickly located Innocent's residence, which was just a few streets from the pharmacy. The Carabinieri arrived at Innocent's apartment but did not find him. Then, using luminol, they discovered more blood and clothing that matched the last clothes Pamela wore. Authorities believe both Pamela and Innocent were under the influence of substances. It is thought that he experienced a seizure and attacked her. A forensic report revealed disturbing details, with Innocent apparently attempting to destroy his DNA by thoroughly washing Pamela's dismembered body with bleach. The condition of the remains was so poor that it delayed the determination of the cause of death. He was unsuccessful in disposing of the suitcases containing the bodies. He was captured on surveillance cameras outside a nearby building. It was also discovered that he was not alone during this time. He arrived in a car with a taxi driver friend. This led to an expanded list of suspects. Subsequently, Desmond Lucky and Lucky Awalima were arrested on suspicion of being involved in the crime. Both were in the car Innocent appeared in, carrying suitcases, but they denied knowing about the body inside. Innocent was tracked down and arrested a few hours later. However, he consistently denied attacking Pamela, claiming that she died from a drug overdose. He stated that he handled the body out of fear of legal trouble and deportation. He believed that the quickest and most discreet way to dispose of the body was to put it in separate suitcases and throw them away. However, the police did not find his explanation credible. Pamela's parents have tried their best to refute bad rumors related to their daughter. They argued that Pamela's actions were influenced by her borderline personality disorder, which made it difficult for her to control her behavior. This led to bad habits and erratic actions. On her social media pages, she repeatedly stated that she was ready to quit prohibited substances when her real life improved, which she believed could be achieved with the help of others. However, during the investigation, it was revealed that she frequently left the rehabilitation center to seek out prohibited substances. At that time, items and bloodstains found in Innocent's house were tested in a lab, confirming they belonged to Pamela. Initially, Innocent denied any involvement in the incident, claiming that Pamela died from an overdose. He admitted to offering her drugs, but did not explain how she paid for them. Innocent also denied abusing her, but many did not believe him. Unfortunately, there was no way to confirm or disprove his claims, as the remains had been thoroughly cleaned, leaving no evidence. When asked about his friends, Desmond and Awalima, who were with him during the disposal of the body, Innocent gave very strange information. He stated that on the day of Pamela's death, these friends were at his house. He claimed he did not see anyone attack her and that he passed out during the party. When he woke up, Pamela was with him. This account contradicted his earlier claim that Pamela had died from an overdose. Additionally, bloodstains found at the scene contradict Innocent's claims. It is clear that Pamela was abused and murdered, making Innocent's testimony unreliable. Awalima and Desmond, who were also experienced drug dealers, were detained but denied any involvement from the start. They claimed they were not at Innocent's house during the murder and provided an alibi. However, it took a long time to verify this alibi, and they remained in jail as witnesses to support their claims could not be located. Investigators then reviewed call recordings and tracked the locations of Awalima and Desmond. It turned out that neither of them were at Innocent's house at the time of the murder. They were selling prohibited substance in another part of the city. As a result, the murder charges against them were dropped, but questions about their involvement in hiding evidence, and the body remained. Meanwhile, Innocent maintained that Pamela had died from an overdose and that he had no part in her murder. However, a forensic expert discovered 2 deep stab wounds to Pamela's liver. Given the nature of these injuries, it is suspected that they were inflicted intentionally to kill her, rather than as a result of handling the body. There were reasons to suspect that Innocent had abused Pamela while she was unconscious, which contributed to the tragic incident that followed. A toxicology report revealed that Pamela had a high level of illegal substances in her bloodstream. A forensic expert noted that this level should have rendered her unconscious at the time of her death, but it was unclear if the amount could have caused her death. However, detectives suspect he took advantage of Pamela, drugging her until she passed out and taking advantage of her while she was dealing with addiction and mental health issues. The case had a new lead when, while Awalima and Desmond were in custody, they discussed the incident that occurred at Innocent's house. Their conversations were recorded, and they talked about how Innocent had abused a girl who was unconscious on the couch. Despite the evidence, Innocent maintained that he did not kill Pamela, but expressed remorse to her family for his role in her accidental death. He claimed she died from an overdose, a statement that her parents found insulting. Innocent acknowledged that after Pamela's death, Awalima and Desmond continued to fabricate stories. By February 2019, a hearing was set to resolve Pamela's murder. At this point, investigations had established Innocent as the central figure in the prosecution's case. While in prison, Innocent revealed details of what had happened to Pamela to fellow inmates. According to one inmate, Innocent met Pamela in a park in Macerata, a known area for illegal activities. He quickly realized she was too trusting and carefree, which led him to exploit her naivety. Innocent quickly convinced Pamela to accompany him to his home, where he intended to use a prohibited substance. On their way, they stopped at a pharmacy so Pamela could purchase a disposable syringe. Innocent later confessed that when she lost consciousness from the use of the prohibited substance, he began to abuse her. However, one injection was not enough to knock her out, and she eventually woke up and tried to fight back. When Pamela threatened to report him to the police, Innocent became frightened, realizing he could face serious legal consequences. In a panic, he and his accomplice attacked her liver, causing her to lose a lot of blood and become unconscious again. Finally, he took steps to handle her body. A forensic expert later confirmed that Pamela had been severely injured and had died. The main witness for the prosecution provided statements that were supported by physical evidence and the testimony of a forensic expert, which was another blow to Pamela's family. Her mother had held on to the hope that her daughter had not suffered, but it was revealed that her death was both horrific and painful. A crucial piece of evidence against Innocent was skin found under Pamela's fingernails. She had fought back and scratched him, and he was unable to completely remove the evidence with bleach. Forensic analysis confirmed that the skin belonged to Innocent, indicating that there had been a struggle between them rather than a sudden death. Additionally, the testimony of Awalima, who had also been under investigation, was presented. He claimed that during the attack he received a call from Innocent. During the call, he heard the sounds of a woman crying and moaning in the background. Innocent had asked Awalima for help with something suspicious, but he declined. When he asked about the woman's screams, Innocent insisted he shouldn't worry about it, and then hung up. In April 2019, evidence and forensic examination results were presented in court, revealing the extent of the cruelty involved in the case. Innocent was identified as the person responsible for Pamela's death. The toxicology report indicated that the level of the prohibited substance found in her blood was insufficient to cause a fatal overdose. The most shocking aspect was how Innocent handled Pamela's body. He attempted to eliminate all evidence of his involvement by using a caustic cleaning agent on her body, including sensitive areas. What is worrying is that Innocent carried out the act methodically, suggesting that he had experience in disposing of bodies. This indicates that this was not the first time he had committed such a crime. On May 29, 2019, a jury found Oseghale not guilty of murdering Pamela Mastropietro, as well as abusing and hiding her body. He was sentenced to life in prison. The defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the verdict and filed an appeal, but on October 16, 2020, the life sentence was upheld. The situation regarding Innocent's accomplices, Desmond and Awalima, was complicated. They were involved in the case and likely knew about the 2 suitcases with a foul odor that Innocent had suddenly discarded in a ditch. It was clear that they were trying to hide something. Many people believed that they were at least partially responsible for concealing the body, but there was no direct evidence linking them to the crime. Consequently, Judge Marat officially dismissed the murder and evidence concealment charges against them. However, they were not released from prison because they faced charges of selling prohibited substances. Authorities found evidence of prohibited substance use and a significant quantity of prohibited substances for sale in their apartments. In April 2019, Desmond Lucky and Lucky Awalima were sentenced to over 8 years in prison. In memory of her daughter, Pamela's mother fulfilled the dreams Pamela never had the chance to fulfill. At the time of Pamela's death, she was only months away from graduating with a diploma in Social Security and healthcare. Pamela had always aspired to be a volunteer and help others. On September 9, 2020, her mother received that diploma in her daughter's honor. Every day, she remembers Pamela, who never got a second chance at a normal life and was tragically exploited by deceitful individuals, one of whom took her life so cruelly. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Katie Sepich. Katie, a 22-year-old woman, was known for her outgoing personality, intelligence, and vibrancy. Born and raised in Carlsbad, New Mexico, she was the eldest of 3 siblings. Katie is Jean's special daughter, admired for her intelligence and charming personality that attracts everyone. Katie graduated from New Mexico State University with a business degree and had plans to start her MBA program in the fall. To support herself, she worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. During her time at the university, Katie met Joe Bischoff and they quickly formed a close bond. Over time, their friendship blossomed into romance. Katie shared her happiness with her mother, Jean, expressing her hopes of building a life with Joe. Months later, Katie's dream became a possibility when Joe proposed to her with a diamond ring. However, after Katie and Joe graduated in the summer of 2003, they faced challenges in their relationship. Katie decided to stay at the university to continue her studies, while Joe returned to his parents' home in Gallup, New Mexico, a small city about 350 miles away from Las Cruces. This distance put a difficult on their relationship. Despite this, Katie and Joe made an effort to stay in touch and meet whenever possible. On Labor Day weekend in 2003, Joe visited Los Cruces and spent time with Katie. However, their weekend together turned into a tragedy. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, Katie had fun with Joe and their friends, going from bar to bar and eventually ending up at a local house party. After the party, Katie vanished. The following day, August 31st, 2003, Katie's mother, Jean, received a phone call. This changed her life forever. Recounting that day, Jean described it as follows. She had been preparing for a Labor Day weekend cookout with her family and friends when the phone rang at 2:15 afternoon, bringing news that would shatter her world. The caller asked, "Have you talked to Katie today?" The phone call was from Katie's roommate, Veronica, who had been searching for her and had already contacted Katie's friends and local hospitals without finding any sign of her. Jean was informed by Veronica that Katie had left the party by herself the night before. Veronica and Joe had fallen asleep at the party location, assuming Katie had returned home. However, when they woke up in the morning, Katie was nowhere to be found. Her family immediately contacted the police to report her disappearance. Around the same time, a passerby discovered a half-naked woman's body near a desert landfill. Although there was no identification nearby, police officers arriving at the scene concluded that the body had likely been there for less than 24 hours. It was clear to them that the victim's death was no accident. The victim, estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old, had been stripped of clothing from the waist down. Examination of the body revealed self-defense wounds on her arms, indicating she had put up a fight and scratched her attacker. The police found skin particles under her fingernails, providing them with the perpetrator's DNA. Strangulation marks were visible on her neck, initially suggesting it as the cause of death. The investigators concluded that the young woman did not die at the remote desert landfill where her body was found, as there were no signs of a struggle near the scene. Instead, it appears her body was moved there in an attempt to delay the search. A disturbing detect on the victim's body revealed burn marks on her arms and back, suggesting that the perpetrator had tried to dispose of the body or destroy evidence by setting it on fire. The police quickly made a connection between Katie's disappearance and the discovery of a young woman's body. Katie's father was called to the morgue to identify the body. Katie's mother, Jean, said that the young woman's body was their daughter's. Jean struggled to put into words the immense pain and agony they were enduring. As if they were falling into a deep, dark abyss with no way out, leaving them with no sense of tomorrow or any remaining joy. Katie's father shared that when they lifted the sheet, revealing his daughter's bruised and disfigured face, he was deeply saddened. The residents of once peaceful Los Cruces were shaken by the horrific incident. The police were determined to find the perpetrator as soon as possible, aware that there was no guarantee the person wouldn't commit another crime. The investigation into Katie's case began with a thorough examination of her final hours. The police aimed to piece together her last moments, where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, and if she had any conflicts or enemies. Since the party was about a mile from Katie's home, investigating whether she made it back safely was a priority. To start, the investigators spoke with Veronica, Katie's roommate, and Joe. The detectives found it suspicious that these two stayed at the party while Katie left alone in the middle of the night. However, Joe was uncooperative, stating that Katie had departed, leaving her purse, phone, and keys behind. The investigation team then focused on retracing Katie's route home, going door to door to interview residents, hoping for any leads. Unfortunately, no one saw or heard anything that could help the investigation. Investigations revealed a crucial detect. Katie likely returned to her house but failed to enter it. Notably, she had left her keys behind. Upon searching the house, the investigator found Katie's shoes beside her bedroom window. It appears she attempted to enter through the window but was ambushed. Footprints in the gravel nearby supported this theory. A violent struggle ensued, but sadly, Katie's attacker overpowered her. Further investigation led the authorities to believe that the perpetrator disposed of Katie's body at a desert landfill, attempting to conceal evidence by setting it on fire. The central question remained: was the attacker a stranger or someone Katie trusted? With around 40 party attendees, there was a strong possibility the killer was an acquaintance. Could the perpetrator have been Katie's boyfriend, Joe? This led investigators to interview partygoers, unearthing a critical detail Joe did not mention. Several witnesses reported that Katie saw Joe kissing another girl, which sparked a heated argument between the couple. In her state of anger, Katie hastily left the party alone, forgetting her purse. When questioned by police, Joe neglected to disclose this crucial information. He also did not inform Katie's parents about the incident, despite their curiosity about why Katie had left the party by herself. The investigators questioned Joe again about his whereabouts on the night of Katie's murder. They had discovered that he and Katie had a fight earlier that evening after she saw him kissing another girl. Joe acknowledged the argument and explained that he followed Katie home but did not enter her house. He claimed he saw her bedroom light was off and assumed she was asleep, so he returned to the party. However, the new information sparked suspicion because it indicated Joe was not at the party when the attack occurred, and none of the partygoers could confirm when he returned. During further interviews with party attendees, investigators found another peculiar detail. When he returned to the party, Joe called Katie. Then Joe heard the phone ring, and he realized that she had left her phone at the party. Despite this, Joe continued to phone her until morning. Was he trying to create an alibi or pretend to be concerned about Katie's well-being? Investigators asked Joe to clarify his actions, but he refused to cooperate with them any. Katie loved Joe very much, but he didn't even come to her funeral, which aroused even greater suspicion. Investigators decided to test his DNA. They had collected DNA evidence from Katie's body, mostly under her fingernails, where they found human skin cells. The sample's DNA all belonged to one person. The police needed to compare his DNA to the DNA found on Katie's body. But there were problems with that. Joe was out of town, and his lawyer informed the investigators that Joe refused to provide a DNA sample. The police suspected that Joe was involved in Katie's death, given his suspicious behavior. To confirm that, they needed to find a legitimate way to obtain Joe DNA. However, this took time, and in the meantime, they searched other possible explanations. They investigated similar cases to determine if Katie was the victim of a serial offender. The DNA found on her body was matched against a national database, but no matches were found. The investigators decided to revisit the party where Katie was last seen. They identified the male attendees and asked for their DNA samples, which they all willingly provided. However, none of their DNA matched the samples found on Katie's body, leading the investigators to focus on Joe again. Notably, Joe was the only person who had refused to provide a DNA sample, but the investigators found an alternative method to obtain Joe's DNA sample. Katie and Joe spent time in her bedroom before attending the party, engaging in intimate contact. The police visited Katie's house and collected the bed sheet, hoping to find Joe's DNA. Their efforts were successful, and the lab discovered a sample of male DNA on the sheet. However, the DNA did not match the sample found on Katie's body, indicating that Joe was not the suspect. This discovery raised further questions about Joe's behavior, as he had refused to cooperate with the police despite not being involved in the attack on his girlfriend. The police sent the test results to Joe's lawyer, informing them that he had been cleared as a suspect. Joe agreed to talk to the police again and provided a DNA sample. The results supported the initial findings. Joe was not involved in Katie's crime. When questioned about his initial reluctance to cooperate, Joe explained that he and Katie had been intimate before the party, and he was worried that his DNA would be found on her body. The mystery surrounding Joe's behavior on the night of Katie's death remained unsolved for the police and Katie's family. After Joe was cleared as a suspect, the police explored alternative theories. Party attendees informed investigators that Katie was wearing rings, including the one given by Joe, but none were found on her body when it was discovered. The police believed that the killer removed the rings from Katie's fingers. They searched local pawn shops but did not find Katie's rings. The discovery of specific tire tracks near where Katie's body was found provided another new lead. Experts identified the tire brand and model, and the manufacturer informed the police that these tires were most commonly used on pickup trucks. Unfortunately, this information did not help identify the culprit, and the case hit a dead end. A year after Katie's attack, a similar crime occurred in Wisconsin. A girl in Green Bay was assaulted, set on fire, and left for dead. However, the victim somehow managed to survive by pretending to be dead. Once her attackers left, she put out the flames and sought help at a nearby residence. The survivor described her attackers to the police as two Hispanic men. The police created sketches based on her description and released them to the public. A local farmer recognized the men in the sketches as his workers, Gregorio Morales and Juan. One of them had relatives in Los Cruces, and he often visited them. Both men were arrested. As a result, the police were able to apprehend both suspects. Initially, investigators thought they had identified Katie's attacker, but the DNA test results contradicted this conclusion. The sample's DNA did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. Although Gregorio Morales and Juan were later convicted of assaulting the girl in Green Bay, they were not linked to Katie's case. Gregorio Morales and Juan were sentenced to 50 and 70 years in prison, respectively. The only leads the police had to go on were the tire tracks from the crime scene and the DNA samples of the perpetrator. Katie's family was hopeful that these DNA samples would allow the police to identify the person who took their daughter's life. Unfortunately, there were complications with the DNA evidence. At that time, police were not mandated to collect DNA samples from individuals when they were arrested. Katie's mother was shocked and devastated by the loss of her daughter to a violent man. The family's main concern is to find out the identity of the perpetrator, understand the motive behind this terrible crime, and most importantly, that the killer is held accountable and no longer poses a threat to others. The lead detective gives an update on the case, saying that aside from DNA evidence, they currently lack concrete other leads to investigate further. Katie had fought hard for her life, which resulted in her killer's blood and skin being found under her fingernails. This had allowed investigators to create a DNA profile. Detectives uploaded the DNA into CODIS, the National Forensic Database, and then checked it against the offender database on a weekly basis to see if there was a match. Although they had the killer's identity through the DNA profile, the police needed to find the matching individual in their database to make an identification. Katie's family felt hopeful, they knowing the police would eventually match the DNA to a suspect, bringing them closer to justice for their daughter's tragic death. Katie's murder case saw a major breakthrough 3.5 years later. On December 18, 2006, the lab found a DNA sample that matched the DNA found on Katie's body. The perpetrator was identified as 26 years old Gabriel Avila, a married man of 2. He has a very long previous criminal record and had been released from prison shortly before Katie's death. On November 13, 2003, Gabriel Avila was apprehended by authorities after breaking into an apartment, armed with a knife. Fortunately, 2 young women inside the apartment managed to evade his attack by quickly locking themselves in the bathroom and dialing 911 for emergency assistance. He was convicted of aggravated burglary in March 2004, but released on bond. A flaw in the system caused a significant delay, and it wasn't until 3.5 years later that investigators were able to link him to Katie's death. Gabriel Avila managed to evade police for nearly a year. Then, he being apprehended in November 2004, based on a tip. He received a 9-year prison sentence. While in prison, Gabriel Avila provided a DNA sample, but it took 2 more years to be tested. Once the results showed a partial match with the DNA from Katie's crime scene, investigators quickly jumped into action. They found the truck Gabriel Avila used to dispose of Katie's body and discovered a ring belonging to her in the center console. In 2006, after finding a ring belonging to Katie in Gabriel Avila truck, detectives investigating Katie's case visited his in prison. Gabriel Avila confessed to the crime, explaining that while his wife was away, he was in the area to buy illicit substances. He claimed that he approached Katie and offered her a ride, which she declined. Later that night, Gabriel Avila encountered Katie again in front of her house. He stopped and offered her assistance, and that Katie told him she was locked out without her purse. Gabriel Avila attempted to help her, but he then attacked and began undressing Katie. What followed was a violent assault. After the assault, Gabriel Avila panicked and decided to strangle Katie out of fear that she would identify him. Despite Katie putting up a brief struggle, Gabriel Avila restrained her, unable to let go, ultimately leading to her death. Gabriel Avila claimed he put Katie in his pickup truck and drove her to a desert landfill, where he left her body on the ground. He attempted to burn the body, thinking it would eliminate evidence. But this effort was unsuccessful. A new DNA sample from Gabriel Avila matched the DNA found at the scene. When authorities found DNA on Katie's body in 2003, her parents were optimistic that it would help quickly find a suspect. However, at the time, there was a significant gap in the law. In New Mexico and most states, it was illegal to take DNA when someone was arrested. DNA could only be collected from individuals who had been convicted of a crime and sent to prison. This meant that the DNA on Katie's body couldn't initially be matched. The trial of Gabriel Avila, who was accused of the crime, began in 2017. Gabriel Avila apologized to Katie's family during the trial. His lawyer asked the judge to consider showing leniency, emphasizing that Gabriel Avila was genuinely remorseful for his actions. In contrast, District Attorney Susana Martinez countered that it took Gabriel Avila more than 3 years to confess to the crimes, and he only did so after detectives presented him with DNA evidence. At the sentencing, David, Katie's father, pleaded with the judge to hand down a severe punishment. He stressed that because Katie would never have another opportunity in life, it was only fair that her killer should not be given a chance to be free again. In May 2007, Gabriel Avila was found guilty and sentenced to 69 years in prison. After serving 30 years, he will be eligible for parole around 2043. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Christina and Thompson Harris. Christina and Thompson and Jason Thomas Harris, both 40, had been married for 11 years by 2014. They got married in 2003, after dating for about 5 years. In 2009, Christina and Jason welcomed their first child, which brought significant changes to their lives. Despite the daily challenges and responsibilities, they were happy to be parents. Christina took care of the house and the children, while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As the children grew up, Christina was able to contribute financially to the family by working. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave because she was expecting their second child in a few weeks. On September 29, 2014, Jason chatted with Christina while at work. Christina was suffering from a cold. She had a bad cough and was not sleeping well, but she reassured her husband that she was fine. A few hours later, Jason called his wife at home but received no response. which worried him. Unable to reach Christina, Jason asked a neighbor to check on her. He explained that Christina was sick and not answering the phone. The neighbor knocked on the front door but got no answer, so she called Christina's name. Receiving no response, she decided to try the door, found it unlocked, and entered the house. When she entered the bedroom, she found Christina lying on the bed and could not wake her. The neighbor called 911 and ran out of the house to call another neighbor, a nurse. The nurse checked Christina's pulse and confirmed that she had died. Thus, on September 29, 2014, 4 months after the birth of her second child, Christina was found dead at home. When the police arrived, Jason Harris was present. He told the police and paramedics that his wife had been sick but was alive when he left for work that morning. 2 days later, the medical examiner ruled that Christina died from an overdose of a controlled substance, a finding that shocked her family and friends. Most people who knew Christina, a mother of 2, including a newborn, believed that she had never used drugs. Christina's mother, Kathy, told police that her daughter was fine when she saw her the day before she died. Police were therefore skeptical of Jason Harris's claim that his wife had a cold. According to Kathy, Christina said her marriage to Jason was complicated. Jason was unhappy with the marriage but did not want a divorce because of concerns about child support and custody. Neighbors who discovered Christina's body also provided additional information to the police. Jason reportedly told them that the night before Christina died, he had prepared cereal with milk for her, then Christina passed out and dropped the plate. Police realized that Christina's family and friends had a hard time accepting that she might be involved in drugs. Instead, police suspected that Jason Harris was involved in Christina's death. Christina's mother and sisters insisted that police test her breast milk. According to Kathy, the police ignored the request for 48 hours. However, thanks to the family's persistence, the police finally agreed to investigate. As a result, breast milk was used as evidence for the first time in Michigan history. As confirmed by Christina's family and friends, all drug tests at her workplace and at the hospital where she gave birth to her second child were negative. Her second child was only 4 months old when Christina died. Christina was breastfeeding, and Kathy confirmed that Christina was very careful about what she put into her body because she didn't want to affect her child. Christina often pumped breast milk while at work and stored it in the freezer. Some of the breast milk was left at Kathy's mother's house. They tested 3 bags of breast milk for possible drug residue. These bags were labeled with the date they were put in the freezer so Christina knew which bag to thaw first. Experts tested all the samples, including the ones frozen just before Christina died, and found no signs of drugs. This proves that Christina did not use the substance that killed her. Jason Harris's sister was the only one who suggested that Christina had used drugs, prompting investigators to focus more on Jason and treat Christina's death as a homicide. The investigation was slow, and it is unclear what would have happened if Christina's family had not been actively involved in the search for the truth. Kathy repeatedly reminded Davison police about her daughter's case in August 2016, nearly 2 years after Christina's death. Not seeing the enthusiasm and desire to solve her daughter's case in Davison, Kathy asked Davison police to turn the case over to the Michigan State Police, which had new investigators. From there, the story began to unravel. Police gathered a lot of information about Jason Harris, including how he acted before and after his wife's death. Jason had been having affairs with other women. Christina knew about this and confided in her family and co-workers that Jason had been texting other people while she was giving birth to their youngest child. Christina once told a co-worker that if she died, Jason would be the cause. When asked if she was serious, she said yes. Jason told his co-worker that he suspected the second child was not his biological child. He also complained that after the birth, Christina became depressed, often stayed in bed, and did not go to work. Jason often complained about Christina nagging him. A co-worker of Jason recalled that Jason may have told him that he wanted Christina dead. He described the relationship between Jason and Christina as toxic and recalled that they argued frequently. One of the most surprising and shocking things about this case is that Jason Harris did not hesitate to let everyone know that he wanted to get rid of his wife. He tried to do so, but unfortunately, no one paid attention to his words and actions before Christina died. Jason bought poison twice and mixed it into her drink. Both times, Christina felt that the taste was unusual and did not drink it. Jason then asked a co-worker to find him a poison that would not change the taste or smell of drinks or food. Jason said he wanted to knock Christina unconscious so she would not feel anything. When he shared with the co-worker that Christina would not drink water because it tasted strange, the co-worker refused to talk to him further. The co-worker testified that Jason had talked about wanting Christina to stop nagging and that the co-worker thought Jason was joking. Jason also told a co-worker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the person was arrested for another reason before the murder. Jason therefore offered the co-worker $10,000 from Christina's $100,000 life insurance policy to kill her. The co-worker refused the offer, thinking that Jason was just venting his anger by talking about his wife and making inappropriate jokes. According to the colleague, he recalled a conversation with Jason in which Jason said, "I'm bored with her. I'm going to dump her." The police then decided to question the neighbor who discovered Christina's body. The neighbor testified that she saw Christina's family truck in the driveway. But Christina did not come to the door. She entered the house and found Christina lying in bed, unresponsive. The neighbor asked Jason if she should try to wake her up. He replied that Christina must have fallen asleep and that he would come home. The neighbor went back inside and removed the covers around Christina because she felt cold and had foam coming from her mouth and nose. The neighbor called 911 and another neighbor who was a registered nurse. The neighbor, who was a registered nurse, testified that Christina was cold, stiff, had no pulse, and had white foam coming from her mouth. She did not attempt to resuscitate Christina because she believed she was already dead. Jason told the police that he asked a neighbor to check on Christina and that he had to rush home because Christina was unresponsive. However, witnesses said Jason did not appear anxious or in a hurry. What raised suspicions about Jason was that morning, he called Christina's supervisor at work. He told her that Christina had died the night before and that he wanted to inquire about the $100,000 death benefit from Christina's life insurance policy through work. Additionally, one of the women Jason had an intimate relationship with told investigators that Jason had contacted her on the day of Christina's death and said that his wife had died from an overdose of a controlled substance. This suggests that he knew what caused Christina's death even before the medical examiner's report. That evening, the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina saw him in his driveway. She said that Jason told her that Christina was not the angel her parents thought she was and that their child would soon learn all the good and bad things about Christina. He said that Christina dropped her bowl of cereal, and he told her to go to bed. Jason also told a neighbor that his wife tossed and turned during the night and that he heard her coughing before he left for work. Jason wondered if that was her last breath. Jason told a police officer that Christina was coughing a lot when he left the house. He also told the police that Christina fell asleep eating cereal the night before she died. Finally, Jason told Christina's mother, Kathy, that before she died, Christina complained that her water tasted like chemicals. One of the main motives in this case is believed to be insurance money. Within a week of Christina's death, Jason and his mother went to Christina's workplace to inquire about the life insurance money. Additionally, Jason received a $20,000 death benefit from a life insurance policy issued by his company shortly after Christina's death. One of Jason's lovers moved in with Jason and his children. Christina's mother believed that Jason's lover moved in with him after Christina's funeral. However, Jason's neighbor testified that the lover had even moved into Jason's home before Christina's funeral. The neighbor added that Jason's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the home within days of Christina's death. Police also discovered that Jason Harris purchased a plane ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman with whom he had exchanged more than 5,800 text messages. County Medical Examiner Dr. Brian Hunter submitted post-mortem blood and urine samples for laboratory testing. Dr. Hunter determined that the test results were consistent with Christina being poisoned by a lethal substance. Initially, Dr. Hunter determined that her death was an accident. Because there were no injection marks on Christina's body and investigators did not find any powder residue or rolling papers next to the bed where Christina died. In 2016, the Michigan State Police took over the investigation into Christina's death. In 2019, after Christina's family disputed Christina's cause of death, Dr. Hunter later changed Christina's death certificate from an accident to a homicide. Police charged Jason with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance resulting in death. He was denied bail. Jason's attorney, Nicholas Robinson, said his client pleaded not guilty to the charges and wanted to fight them. When he was arrested, Jason had lost his job after testing positive for drugs. Kathy's efforts to ensure that law enforcement would punish the person responsible for her daughter's death were not overlooked. Gena's County Prosecutor David Layton said that a few years ago, he began receiving Facebook messages and emails from a Davidson woman who claimed her daughter had died and that her death was not an accident. "It can't be happening," the woman told the prosecutor. She was certain that someone had caused her daughter's death. Kathy's passionate pleas caught David Layton's attention, prompting authorities to re-examine the death of her daughter, Christina. "I will never forget what she wrote in an email, Prosecutor, you are my last hope. This is our last chance to get justice for my daughter. Please help me," David Layton said. "At that moment and as I spoke to her this morning, I was absolutely convinced that her daughter's death was not an accident. It was the result of foul play. It was Kathy's relentless efforts to seek justice for her daughter's death that led to this situation. And those efforts paid off." The trial began in 2020. The prosecution alleged that Jason put a controlled substance in his wife's cereal bowl to kill her. He then went to work as usual, waited a few hours, and asked a neighbor to check on Christina. According to the prosecution, Jason wanted someone else to discover his wife's body in order to reduce suspicion against him. The direct evidence against Jason was overwhelming. Jason had a motive for killing Christina. He was having an affair with another woman, suspected she was cheating on him, believed the second child was not his, and was tired of her nagging. Jason did not want a divorce because he did not want to pay child support or lose custody of her. Before her death, Jason told a coworker that he wanted Christina dead. On the morning of her death, Jason called her company to inquire about a $100,000 life insurance policy, and in that call, he said Christina had died the night before. The jury heard clear evidence that Jason not only wanted Christina dead, but that he had tried to hire someone to kill her. He planned to do this and knew where to buy illegal drugs. In fact, he had purchased them on multiple occasions to give to Christina. At trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christina did not use drugs recreationally. Christina was very careful about what she consumed because she was breastfeeding. Furthermore, tests showed that her frozen breast milk contained no harmful substances. To support the theory that Jason had poisoned Christina's food, the prosecution presented toxicology reports. For example, Dr. Judge argued that Christina's death could have been caused by ingestion of some kind of poison. The prosecution ruled out injection because no traces of injection or needles were found at the scene. Dr. Judge also testified that inhalation was unlikely because no rolled-up dollar bills or snorting paper were found at the scene. The court gave Jason Harris a chance to speak, but he did not apologize or show remorse. Instead, he insisted that he was innocent. The judge said, "The jury did not believe your lies," ultimately exposing him as a selfish and deceitful murderer. On November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason Harris, 47, guilty on all charges. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He has appealed the verdict, however. After the trial, prosecutor David Layton expressed his condolences to Christina's family and friends, emphasizing that this was a tragic case. Layton went on to say, "While this case has many unique and media-driven details, the most important thing is the family's loss. I hope this verdict helps them find comfort in knowing that justice has been served." Jason requested a new trial on the grounds that his defense attorney did not do a good job. He introduced evidence in the form of his attorney's testimony, showing that his defense attorney failed to seek an independent expert opinion on the prosecution's evidence and failed to consult with an independent toxicologist. Jason's defense attorney explained this decision as part of a trial strategy because he had thoroughly questioned Dr. Hunter and was able to show the jury that Dr. Hunter had changed his opinion about the cause of death based on information from a related civil lawsuit. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction. He remains in prison for life without the possibility of parole. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Mikhail Bush. Mikhail Bush was born on February 13, 1997, in Alberta, Canada. She is the eldest of 2 daughters. She attended a local high school, where she met Cody McConnell. They began their relationship in the summer of 2014. Later their relationship blossomed and they decided to start a family together. After graduating, Mikhail worked at a public organization that supported people with disabilities by finding nurses and meeting their needs. There, she realized her passion for helping people. At work, she learned the basics of healthcare and decided to pursue a career in nursing. To achieve this, she needed formal training, so Mikhail enrolled at Northwest College in Edmonton. She devoted all her free time to studying, determined to become a skilled professional. Working in the medical field in Canada is respected and well paid. This meant that pursuing a major that she loved would allow her to support their small family. Her relationship with Cody grew stronger, and he supported her in her studies. At that time, they lived together. In 2019, shortly after graduating, she found out she was pregnant. This was an important and anticipated event for the young couple, and they were very excited. Everything went as well as could be. Their dream of expanding their family became a reality. Soon after, the young couple got married and began preparing for their future child. On April 17, 2020, they welcomed a son named Noah McConnell. After his birth, Mikhail and Cody devoted themselves to taking care of their child and supported each other wholeheartedly. At this time, Mikhail and Cody lived happily together. Noah was a very cute child. He rarely cried, and when he did, it usually stopped very quickly. However, a few months later, Cody had difficulty working and was easily tired, so his wife Mikhail advised him to go to the hospital. After the examination, Cody was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Because of this, he lost his job. Cody was on sick leave for a long time, but during this time, they always supported and understood each other. The couple tried their best to maintain their happiness. After a while, Cody was able to return to his job. He worked in the installation of turboprop engines, a job that required frequent business trips to different cities. This sudden change in lifestyle naturally affected the family. At that time, Mikhail was a housewife, taking care of her children without a regular job. In order to avoid being apart for a long time, they decided to buy a mobile home. Life on the road was difficult, but the family stayed together. By August 2020, their life had undergone significant positive changes. Cody secured a higher-paying job, allowing him to spend more time at home. The couple traveled frequently to different locations, but they had the opportunity to rent an apartment in Hinton, Alberta. This small town is 3 hours west of Edmonton, near Jasper National Park. The move, which meant they no longer had to live on the road, marked a long-awaited change in their family life. In early September, the couple and their child moved into their new home. The apartment was much more spacious than their previous home and certainly larger than the small trailer they had been living in. Cody could finally settle down with his family and focus on building a life together. However, the young couple had no idea that their happiness would soon turn into a nightmare so severe that a change in the law would be necessary. On September 16, 2021, in Canada, the day started like any other morning for the family. Cody took his child for a walk and they spent money on entertainment, something they could not afford before. Now that life had improved, Cody was able to spend more time with his 16-month-old son. Cody then went to work as usual, leaving his wife at home. His shift ended around 5 or 6 p.m., and he returned home, eager to spend more time with his son. However, when he got home, the apartment was quiet. The child did not respond to his name or make any noises as usual. The silence was alarming. After searching all the rooms, Cody realized that his family was actually not home, which was unusual. Cody thought that his wife might have gone to the store with the baby for a while. But upon closer inspection, he realized that was unlikely, as the stroller was still in the apartment, neatly folded and untouched. Without the stroller, they would not have gone for a walk, and his wife's car was still parked outside, which made him even more worried. Cody ran around the apartment screaming, but the silence made him suspicious. In the kitchen, he discovered another worrying sign. His wife had started cooking dinner but had stopped abruptly. The groceries were still on the table, some cut and some still intact. It seemed like something had interrupted her, which made Cody extremely worried. He tried calling his wife but couldn't get through. With no answer and growing increasingly worried, he decided to take action. Although he didn't want to believe that anything bad had happened, he hoped they had just gone to a nearby park or plaza and lost track of time. Desperate to find her, he set off immediately. With increasing anxiety, he searched alleys and parks but found no trace of his wife and son. After going through the area around the apartment complex several times, he contacted friends and family, hoping that she was with someone he knew. However, no one heard or saw her all day. Around 7 p.m., in desperation, Cody called the police to report that his wife and son were missing. Cody called a friend named Jareth, who came to their home to help. Together, they began searching the neighborhood, still hoping to find Mikhail and his son without police intervention. They checked the apartment again and walked around the entire apartment complex several times. Unable to calm down, they began going from apartment to apartment, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had seen or heard anything. When the police arrived, Cody and Jarrett were still searching. The police had to calm them down. Since Cody and Jareth were not professionals, their search could disrupt or destroy important evidence. Therefore, the police instructed them to stop their search efforts. The police thoroughly searched the apartment, the surrounding residential area, and nearby squares and parks, but like Cody, they were unable to find anything. Cody's next-door neighbor, Robert, told the police that he had witnessed an unknown man running out of Cody's apartment that day. Although he could not provide further details, the neighbor's account raised suspicions. Therefore, the police decided to consult with the apartment manager to gain access to surveillance camera footage. They wanted to determine when and why Mikhail and the child disappeared. whether she had run away or been kidnapped. There was speculation that a lover might have been involved, but Cody adamantly denied this. He said he had a happy family. Initially, police found no signs of forced entry, struggle, or blood in the family's apartment. Police also considered whether there had been a kidnapper. However, how could the perpetrator have entered without any signs of forced entry? It was probably someone Mikhail knew and trusted enough to open the door for. When police reviewed the surveillance footage, they found no evidence to support the neighbor's claim that a stranger had entered Mikhail's apartment. Instead of catching the mysterious stranger, the footage showed the neighbor taking a bag out of her apartment and throwing it in the apartment complex's trash bin. Mikhail and her son were not seen in the surveillance footage, raising suspicions about the neighbor's involvement in the disappearance. Meanwhile, Cody and Jarrett anxiously waited for news near home, eventually staying at another neighbor's apartment. Cody was expecting his wife and child to return. At 2 a.m., at the apartment where Cody was staying, the police knocked on the door. However, they did not have good news for Cody. Instead, they asked him to move to a hotel while the investigation was ongoing. The police stated that waiting was useless. They needed to take a closer look at the apartment and the area around the house. In fact, the police did not come by accident. They did not want to tell Cody that his child had been found dead, because they had to confirm the prime suspect. The next morning, Cody, who had not slept all night, went to the police station for questioning after leaving his home. The police asked him the usual questions to piece together the events of the previous day. However, many of the questions left him confused, leading him to suspect that something was wrong. The police then revealed that Noah's body was found in a trash can inside the residence. Noah had been strangled, with a man's sock in her mouth and a plastic bag over her head. Some of Mikhail's belongings were found, but her body was not found. Chance for his wife and children to return home safely was gone. Receiving news from the police, he was horrified and in pain when his child died tragically. During the night, Cody was asked to leave the apartment because the police did not want to draw attention to the arrest of the neighbor who lived next door. The police, skeptical of the neighbor Robert's story, visited him again and asked to check his apartment, where the police found a body in the bathroom. She was small and lying face down, but the worst part was that her entire body had been cut into pieces. Experts found evidence of sexual violence committed after her death. The Mikhails had only moved into the complex a few weeks ago. They had barely had time to see some of the neighbors. With Robert, they had hardly ever seen him. Cody thought they had a quiet, unassuming neighbor who didn't want to draw attention to himself. Robert kept his distance from everyone. Now, it was clear that the most dangerous guy was living among them, but no one knew about it. What the neighbors didn't know was that Robert Maid had been arrested on suspicion of murder and child abuse. During a background check, police discovered that Robert had a criminal record with 24 convictions, including 2 for sexual violence. He was first charged with a felony for assaulting a girl in the early 2000s. It is unclear whether he ever served any prison time for this crime. Then, in 2012, Robert was charged with a brutal sex crime. He posed as a nanny to gain the trust of a couple and, when he picked up their child, raped the child instead of going for a walk in the park. He is suspected of being involved in other similar incidents. Robert was arrested and convicted for this crime, but only served 3 years. While in prison, he attended a special rehabilitation program for sex offenders, received psychological support, and attended church regularly. Robert was released from prison after psychiatrists deemed him ready to re-enter society. However, this assessment proved to be incorrect. Just a few years after his release, he expressed a desire to harm innocent people. The police reviewed his test results while in prison and found that he had not been rehabilitated. Instead, he preferred to attack children and young women for the thrill of it. Since there was no legal basis to detain him any longer, Edmonton police could only warn that Robert was dangerous and likely to harm someone again. This man was clearly a threat to women, and especially young children. In order to protect society from potential rapists, many restrictions were placed on him. Specifically, he was prohibited from being near children and women, and could not live near schools or parks. Robert was also subject to a curfew and could only leave Edmonton with official permission from his supervising police officer. After his release from prison, he strictly followed these regulations for many years. He was monitored, so he did not appear in crime reports. However, over time it became clear that he had been waiting for an opportunity to commit a crime. Under Canadian law, a convicted sex offender can be removed from the Dangerous Offender Register if they have not been involved in any similar incidents for a year. In June 2020, this happened to one such offender. Despite his extensive criminal history, a court decision removed the rapist from police supervision. This allowed him, to move to a new residential area, a move that had previously been restricted. Now, he is unsupervised and unmonitored. The public was outraged by the tragic situation. By removing the restrictions on the offender, the police endangered the lives of women and children in the area. Cody said people deserved to know that they were living near a dangerous rapist, giving them the opportunity to relocate if necessary. The investigation found that 2 victims were killed before police were notified. It was discovered that Robert and the victims were just neighbors in a senior housing complex. They did not know or communicate with each other. During questioning, Robert openly confessed to these motives. As before, he informed the police that he struggled with the urge to kill and physically abuse at the same time. He admitted that he was a sick person who needed to be prayed for and confessed that he enjoyed the process. Robert believed that he needed to be isolated from society, otherwise, he feared that he would repeat his actions. Cody, who had just lost his entire family, was visited by his brothers, friends, co-workers, neighbors, and concerned citizens who came to pay their respects. It was believed that if there had not been a system error, the police would have continued to monitor this dangerous criminal and McHale would still be alive. Cody attended all the hearings, wearing his wife's wedding ring around his neck and carrying a blue blanket. Deeply saddened, he was determined to defend his rights. Even through tears, he insisted that ordinary citizens should be informed about potentially dangerous criminals living nearby. Until recently, ordinary Canadians did not have access to databases of dangerous criminals. Wanting to protect other families, Cody McConnell launched a campaign to change the existing laws. The effort, dubbed Noah's Law in honor of his young son. Robert pleaded guilty to all charges and recounted the events of that day in court. He said that after Cody left for work, Cody's wife and son went for a walk in a nearby park. When they returned home, they encountered the apartment manager. The manager informed McHale that Cody had made a mess in the hallway the day before and asked him to clean it up. Sure enough, Cody had made a mess the day before, leaving a mark. McHale apologized for the mess and promised to clean it up, she planning to do so later. At that moment, Robert overheard the conversation and saw it as the perfect opportunity to act. McHale entered the apartment with the child, fed Noah, and planned to put him to bed. While the child was playing, McHale began cooking dinner and called her friend. During the phone conversation, there was a knock on the door. The friend later testified that she had heard the knock, although it was faint due to the distance. Robert offered to help clean up since she was busy watching the child. The woman thanked him for his help and agreed. Her conversation with her friend then ended. After cleaning up, Robert found an excuse to enter McHale's apartment. When he gained access to her home, suddenly, Robert attacked her, strangling her with his hands for about 10 minutes. Even then, McHale still showed signs of life, so Robert took an electrical cord from an appliance and wrapped it around her neck until she stopped breathing. He raped her, then quietly dragged her to his apartment through the hallway, placing her in the bathroom. Robert then took a knife and inflicted wounds on her body, even removing some of her organs. The police could not find these organs during the investigation, and they were not found in the trash cans, like Noah. Meanwhile, the child was still alive and in the apartment. However, Robert considered the child a threat, so he decided to get rid of the child. He took the child to his apartment and tried to gag the child with a sock. He then suffocated the child by placing a plastic bag over his head. He then placed the body in a trash bag and threw it in a dumpster. During the trial, Robert's behavior was inconsistent. He insists that he is not a bad person and blames mental health issues. However, he also admits that he needs to be separated from society. The idea is that criminals should never be removed from the database if they pose an increased threat. There should be increased police surveillance without any time limits. It is also suggested that residents in nearby areas should be notified if there is a potentially dangerous person living near them. Cody stated that he would never move his family into the same apartment complex as someone like Robert. Currently, the dissemination of requests and proposals to protect the rights of all residents in the country continues. This theme resonates and continues to grow. During the trial, Robert Keith Major, 55, was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Assunta Botera. Rosario Porto and her husband, Alfonso Botera, were wealthy individuals. Rosario's father served as an influential French consul, and her mother was an art teacher. Rosario followed in his father's footsteps. She became a successful lawyer. In 1997, she was appointed French consul. She inherited this post from her father. Alfonso was a well-known journalist. He and Rosario married in 1996, and they moved to a large apartment in an upscale area of Santiago de Compostela, Spain. Rosario had lupus erythematosus, which led doctors to advise against pregnancy. They decided to adopt a child abandoned by his parents and create a loving home for him. Adoption was challenging in Spain, so when they were in their early 30s, they chose to go to China for adoption. After navigating numerous bureaucratic hurdles, they arrived at an orphanage. Rosario immediately noticed a 9-month-old girl, and within 2 weeks, they resolved all issues to officially adopt her. When returning to Spain, the child's documents named her Assunta Fon Yan. This was notable since Assunta was among the first Chinese children adopted in the area. Initially, it seemed fortunate for her to join a respected and wealthy family, but unfortunately, this joy did not last long. Assunta was a highly capable girl. She excelled academically, studied multiple languages, practiced ballet, and attended music school. It seems that Rosario and Alfonso want to give her every opportunity to develop. On July 4, 2013, Rosario and her 12-year-old daughter, Assunta, went to the beach to cool off on a hot day. Assunta told a terrifying story about a man wearing a black mask and gloves who tried to strangle her the night before. The longer the girl talked, the more she lost control, and finally, her mother cried. She knew about it, she was there when it happened, but for some reason she did not contact the police. On the night of September 21, 2013, at 10:30 p.m., Rosario and Alfonso were at the police station for another reason. They reported their daughter, Assunta, was missing for several hours. Then, Rosario recounted Assunta's story of the attempted attack from 2.5 months prior. This left them fearful that the attacker had returned and something terrible might have happened to their daughter. They were terrified she had been kidnapped. Alfonso was convinced she was no longer alive. They urgently pleaded with the police to take immediate action. In the early hours of September 22, 2 men were driving through a forest on their way back from a bar. Suddenly, the driver stopped, saying he noticed something unusual in the forest. He didn't understand what was going on, so he turned his headlights toward the forest and mentioned to his friend that he felt like someone was watching them. Despite this, he wasn't scared, likely due to the alcohol he had consumed, so he got out of the car and walked a few steps into the forest. In the light of the car's headlights, he saw something on the ground that looked like a doll. As he approached, he realized it was a girl. She was tied up, and her clothes were dirty. He checked for a pulse and found that the girl was dead. Then, they quickly contacted the police. The police identified the body as Assunta, who had died just a week before her 13th birthday. While examining the area near her body, they discovered her mobile phone, which contained some disturbing photographs. There are several photos of she wrapped tightly, lying with her eyes wide open. Some forensic experts suggested her dilated pupils indicated possible drug use. Even more distressing were photos of the girl in revealing clothing, with bright makeup, fishnet stockings, and posing provocatively on a couch. Her eyes remained wide open, and her pupils were dilated. These photos later appeared on the internet, were widely circulated and making people angry about how a child was treated like that. Assunta's last day was described by her parents as ordinary. However, then little girl suddenly went missing and was found dead a few hours after they reported her disappearance. On that day, the girl went to visit her father, Alfonso, at his work, and then hurried back home, so she not wanting to miss The Simpsons at about 7 p.m. After she returned home, Rosario, her mother, came back from work and saw her daughter in her room, where she had her books spread out on the floor for homework. Rosario didn't notice anything unusual and left to go to their country house, which was about half an hour away, to pick up bathing suits and other items for a planned beach outing the next day. Rosario returned around 9:30 p.m., and by then, Assunta was no longer in the apartment. Rosario became worried because little girl hadn't called or mentioned any plans to go out, which was unusual for her. Thinking maybe she had gone to see friends, Rosario started calling the girl's friends and Alfonso, but nobody had seen she. Rosario was the last person to see Assunta alive, making her one of the first individuals the detectives focused on, and she was questioned at the station. During her discussion with the police, Rosario recalled the incidents of July 4th, the night of the first attack. When they returned from the store that evening, Assunta closed the front door but left the key in the lock. Her mother didn't notice, and they went to bed. Around 3 a.m., Rosario was awakened by cries for help. Rosario rushed to her daughter's room and saw a large man pinning little girl to the floor, seemingly trying to strangle her. She attacked the intruder, but he was very strong and easily threw her against the wall. Fortunately, no one was harmed, and the attacker fled. Rosario described him as a strong, middle-aged man dressed in black, wearing a mask and gloves, so it is not possible to give a more detailed description. Assunta told her friend about what happened and even sent several photos showing red marks on her neck. Assunta's father, Alfonso, mentioned that little girl had struggled with depression for a long time and was taking medication prescribed by doctors. This was confirmed because Assunta talked to friends and shared her experiences. Recently, she had been speaking more positively about her situation, saying she felt much better. However, after Assunta was first attacked, Rosario did not investigate to find out what was happening to her daughter. She cited Assunta's fragile emotional state and said she feared contacting police would upset Assunta. This explanation was not very convincing. Over the years, Assunta had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital because she often expressed end-her-life thoughts. Besides, she is very tired because of the overload of knowledge at school and extra classes. The nanny also said that Rosario had recently become very frustrated with Assunta, as little girl was no longer meeting Rosario's expectations, and her academic performance had declined. She had become somewhat of a burden, prompting Rosario to consider sending her to study in Poland. However, Rosario did not mention this to the detectives, so they decided to investigate Rosario's immediately. They were particularly interested in the country house Rosario visited on the day Assunta disappeared. As it turned out, when detectives got there, they found Assunta's body lying just 4 kilometers away. Rosario appeared surprised to see them. She was furious. She quickly headed to the second floor, clearly trying to hide something. When a detective checked a nearby trash can, he found a piece of orange rope inside, identical to the one used to tie Assunta's hands and feet. There was also a black mask and gloves. All these items were collected for examination, but unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found. The investigative committee conducted several autopsies. They did not measure the body temperature immediately, fearing it might compromise the evidence, so the exact time of death couldn't be determined. However, it was estimated that Assunta was killed around 8 p.m. The cause of death was suffocation. Her mouth and nose were covered with a soft object, likely a pillow, which prevented her from breathing, leading to unconsciousness and eventually death. In addition, an autopsy determined that Assunta had taken at least 27 lorazepam pills on the day of her death, 9 times the normal amount for an adult. Hair tests revealed this was not the first occurrence. Little girl had overdoses 3 months before her death, starting when the attacker first breaks into the home. It's important to note that overdoses of this drug can cause amnesia and loss of muscle control. The drug was used to treat anxiety disorders and insomnia. The police discovered that Rosario used it to combat depression, but it was not prescribed for Assunta. No one could explain why Assunta took the drug. According to Rosario, the criminals gave Assunta medicine so she wouldn't remember the incident. Detectives conducted a review of CCTV footage in the area to track Assunta's movements that day. Around 2 p.m., she visited her father, Alfonso. At 5:21 p.m., she returned home, and at 5:28 p.m., Rosario returned home. At 6:20 p.m., a gas station camera recorded a green Mercedes belonging to Rosario. She admitted the car was moving towards a house in the country. It was clear that besides the driver, there was a girl in the car, identified as Assunta. They were heading in the direction where Assunta's body was later found. The new testimony completely contradicted Rosario's earlier statements, making she the primary suspect in the murder. Therefore, she was questioned again. Rosario's face showed fear and shame because she had let her adopted daughter go missing while she was responsible for taking care of the girl. Then, she offered a different version of events. According to her, they went out to get swimsuits together, but when they arrived at the country house, Assunta refused to enter with her. Assunta chose to stay in the car while Rosario took everything she needed and did some small work. However, this took longer than expected, and Assunta wanted to return home to do chores and rest. Rosario agreed and drove her daughter back. But she dropped her daughter off about a 20-minute walk from their apartment to avoid navigating the narrow streets. However, the police reviewed CCTV footage from the outskirts of Santiago but found no evidence of Rosario taking her daughter back home. They only saw footage of Rosario leaving her country house alone around 9 p.m. Her story is full of controversial and contradictory details. She appeared to look at the detectives with arrogance, displaying coldness and showing no regret over the loss of her child. She persistently insisted that the large man in black was involved in the incident. When the police interviewed the Botera family's neighbors, one mentioned hearing screams at night in July, when Assunta was first attacked. He also observed something unusual. Even though the attacker entered an area where dogs lived, the dogs were silent, indicating that the attacker was very familiar with them. All in all, everything seemed suspicious, making them even more suspicious that Rosario and Alfonso were involved in the murder of their adopted daughter. The police considered different theories about the first home invasion. Some thought it was fabricated by Rosario, while others suspected it was the parents' first attempt at murder. Few believed an outsider was involved. On September 24th, Rosario and Alfonso held a funeral, during which they behaved oddly, even taking a selfie in front of the coffin. Due to inconsistencies in her testimony, Rosario was arrested after the funeral. By then, detectives had discovered what might have been the motive behind the crime. Witnesses came forward with information about incident from 9 months prior to the tragedy, and this may have been the beginning of the bloody end. In January 2013, Rosario started a relationship with a realtor named Manuel Garcia, whom she hired to sell real estate. Manuel was married and made it clear he would not leave his family. He considers the relationship with Rosario to be nothing more than an affair. Rosario was fine with this, and their secret relationship continued. During this time, her relationship with her husband, Alfonso, quickly deteriorated. She finds Alfonso boring and considers him a failure who overestimates himself. She described him as insensitive, while her lover, Manuel, was the complete opposite. After Alfonso finds messages from Rosario's lover on his wife's phone, they divorced in February 2013. Rosario and her daughter Assunta continued living in the apartment. She maintained her business and visited a country house. Custody of the daughter, Assunta, was shared, and both parents have the right to see the little girl. After Assunta's parents divorced, she lived in both her father's and her mother's houses. Many observed that she was always close to her mother, while her relationship with her father was not as warm. However, her father made efforts to improve their relationship. He also repeatedly told his ex-wife Rosario that they would be forever tied together through their adopted daughter. Is it possible that because Rosario wants to completely cut off contact with her ex-husband, so she will cause the innocent child to leave forever? It is known that earlier in the summer, Rosario had to end her relationship with her lover, Manuel. Alfonso took advantage of the opportunity, he convincing Rosario to end her relationship with Manuel in exchange for his help with their daughter while she was in the hospital. And Rosario agreed to this request. However, it was revealed that on September 21st, Rosario broke her promise, she spending most of the day with Manuel and only returning home in the evening. This is very suspicious, because soon after, Assunta was killed. During the investigation, numerous assumptions were made, including one significant point emphasized by the defense. They argued that male DNA was found on the clothes Assunta's, indicating a man's involvement. While it was considered possible that the mother was not involved in the crime, this scenario was deemed unlikely. Police have stepped up their investigation, collecting documents for analysis, focusing on identifying male DNA on Assunta's body. Several options were considered during the investigation. At first, Alfonso was suspected, but then all attention turned to Manuel. However, he had an alibi and had no motive to harm Assunta, so he was quickly dismissed as a suspect. Surprisingly, the DNA was identified as belonging to a stranger named Ramra, a Colombian citizen who lived in Madrid, about a 6-hour drive from Santiago, where the incident occurred. This may seem strange. When questioned, Ramra fervently denied any connection to the case, claiming he had never been to Santiago and had no involvement in the murder. Indeed, Ramra had an alibi. He was having dinner at a restaurant in Madrid with his girlfriend and was captured on CCTV footage there. Why had Assunta been taking prescription drugs in the months leading up to the incident without any prescription? Further examinations revealed that only a portion of the DNA traces found belonged to Ramra. The lab staff suggested that the match could be due to poor quality samples or contamination. There were even suggestions that someone might have intentionally tampered with the sample's DNA to mislead the investigation. At this stage, many questions remained unanswered, and detectives considered even the most unlikely scenarios. Rosario and Alfonso seemed indifferent to what happened to their adopted daughter. Rosario was the last person to see Assunta alive, and the press speculated that she could have acted alone. Despite her fragile appearance, but investigators doubted she could physically manage Assunta's body. Using cell phone towers, police tried to determine the whereabouts of Rosario and Alfonso at the time of the incident. On that day, their phones were turned off. This makes the police even more suspicious of them. However, Rosario explained it was a coincidence, and their phones just run out of battery at the same time. They don't have any bad intentions. After talking to a local pharmacist, who was also a friend of Rosario's, they discovered that Rosario first contacted the pharmacist on July 5th, the day after an intruder broke into the house and attacked Assunta. After that, this drug lorazepam was purchased in large quantities by Rosario. Considering all the circumstances, the detectives decided to arrest Alfonso Botera. Some of Assunta's teachers had noticed unusual behavior in her. One day, Assunta attended her violin lesson with her father, Alfonso, and she seemed unable to control herself. Alfonso explained that his daughter was just under the influence of allergy medication. The teachers observed that she was usually very reserved and did not share her problems. The drowsiness incident occurred repeatedly, but the parents always had excuses, typically citing her health condition. The teacher was suspicious and distrustful of the girl's parents. When the police interviewed Assunta's teacher, she described Assunta's symptoms and behavior, which matched many side effects of the medication. 2 days before the tragedy, the last suspicious incident happened. On that day, Rosario informed the teacher that her daughter couldn't attend class due to a severe reaction to prescribed medications. After hearing this, the detectives were convinced that the adoptive parents knew about the medications and attempted to poison Assunta. Although Rosario and Alfonso were divorced, but Alfonso was determined to reconcile with she. In June 2013, 3 months before the tragedy, Rosario experienced a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. During this time, Alfonso moved back in, feeling optimistic as his wish to reunite with his family seemed to be coming true. During this period, Rosario ended her relationship with her lover. Alfonso visited her in the hospital and cared for her after her discharge. It seemed like family matters were improving, but later it was revealed that she had lied, she continuing her affair and meeting her lover on the day of the murder. Given the new information, the investigation believes that Alfonso sought revenge. Perhaps he wanted to cause Rosario more pain than he had to endure from her betrayal. This could explain why the orange rope ended up in the trash at the country house. It was simply tossed there by Alfonso. However, why was Rosario so alarmed when the police arrived, and why did she immediately check the trash? She likely knew about these items and was an accomplice. The police have discovered a new clue. Whenever Alfonso was at home with Rosario and Assunta, the little girl be drugged with lorazepam. However, Alfonso refused to comment on this, claiming he was not guilty. After the arrest, Rosario's behavior was unstable, alternating between hysteria and depression. Meanwhile, Alfonso remained quiet and calm, he constantly trying to reassure Rosario's by saying they just needed to love and support each other, and that everything would soon be over. Despite his soothing words, the police noticed his cold demeanor. Eventually, the police found the storage media Alfonso used. It turned out that the hard drive on his laptop had been completely replaced. Experts discovered that over 500,000 photos and videos had been stored on it, likely compromising material. The police also found that he had an unhealthy interest in Asian girls on his social media page. Evidence showed he had dozens of interactions and correspondence with Asian girls, and according to investigators, the photos suggested these girls were minors. Additionally, he often showed interest in adult Asian women with very youthful appearances. Later, a woman who owned an escort agency approached the police. She confessed that Alfonso was a regular at her establishment, always requesting only Asian women and insisting they dress as schoolgirls. Even his wife was aware of this preference. Photos of the murdered Assunta in revealing clothes made the situation even more serious. The prosecutor focused on how the seemingly calm and quiet Alfonso had cruelly treated his adopted daughter Assunta. The charges suggested that Rosario and Alfonso were criminals covering for each other, with both involved in Assunta's death. What could have motivated the crime? Rosario and Alfonso refused to cooperate with the investigation and wouldn't communicate without their lawyers. Later, on their attorney's advice, they completely stopped commenting on the tragedy. Forensic psychiatrists were crucial to the investigation. They analyzed Rosario and Alfonso's behavior and identified them as narcissists with personality disorders. It appeared they adopted Assunta to present a loving family image, pressured by Rosario's parents. Sadly, Assunta became a mere pawn for them, and once she was no longer needed, they first exploited her and then decided to eliminate her. A 15-year-old acquaintance of Assunta testified for the prosecution. Although Alfonso claimed he stayed home all day until the evening on the day of the murder, this was proven false. The girl saw him around 6 p.m. near Rosario's house, a fact later confirmed by camera footage. Alfonso was captured on camera at 9 p.m. after Assunta had disappeared. These conflicting details added to the evidence against Rosario and Alfonso. The trial was highly controversial, with even the judge's conduct coming under scrutiny. Many suspected he sought fame, suspicions that were later validated when he authored a book about the case after the trial concluded. Relatives and neighbors of the Botera family watched for years as the foster parents tried to create the best environment for Assunta. They are financially well off, ambitious and have a tough personality, but those close to them notice their devotion to Assunta. Many people still believe that the trial's outcome was a miscarriage of justice. In court, Rosario and Alfonso maintained their innocence. Alfonso remained calm and reasonable, while Rosario often cried, became hysterical. She puzzled in her testimony in justifying his behavior with the effects of the drug. Rosario's cousin testified at the trial and shared some new information. In 2011 and 2012, Rosario's parents both passed away suddenly at home. Their deaths were suspected to be under unusual circumstances. The cousin believed that Rosario was involved in the murders of her parents and daughter to inherit the entire property. However, the defense attorney rejected these claims. Rosario's mother passed away at the age of 77 and her father passed away at the age of 88. Both passed away peacefully from old age in their sleep in their beds. Although doctors found nothing unusual, their bodies, like Assunta's, were cremated, making it impossible to verify any unnatural causes of death. Meanwhile, the prosecutor contended that Rosario and Alfonso were true sociopaths. Alfonso was apparently a pedophile who drugged his daughter and chose to record these incidents. Assunta posed a threat of exposing them, leading to the decision to eliminate her. This theory was supported by numerous photographs and evidence indicating that Alfonso had an unhealthy obsession with young Asian girls. It is likely that Rosario was complicit in these activities or was at least aware of them but chose to protect Alfonso's wrongdoings. Alternatively, Rosario might have seen the girl as a burden and decided to eliminate little girl with the help of Alfonso. On October 30, 2015, the court found Rosario and Alfonso guilty and sentenced each to 18 years in prison. After beginning their sentences, they both appealed, but their appeals were rejected. On November 18, 2020, Rosario was discovered dead in her prison cell with a belt around her neck. This was her third try to end her life. Alfonso remains imprisoned and maintains his innocence. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the heartbreaking case of a beautiful woman, Julie Scully. Julie Marie Scully, an American woman, gave up everything to pursue love, but just a few months later, Her body was found in a horrific state in a remote lake in Turkey. What turned her beautiful life into an international sensation case? Let's follow the case today. Julie was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. To understand her story better, let's consider her parents' situation. Julia was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation in New Mexico, home to the second-largest Native American tribe in the United States. Life on the reservation was extremely challenging, with no electricity or running water and limited job opportunities due to widespread alcoholism. Many residents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. At the age of 12, Julia's parents sent her to a boarding school to help her learn English and adapt to life outside the reservation. After moving to the city, she began to fit in as an average American and found work at a mental health facility. However, she became addicted to substances. Later, Julia met a police officer named John. They got married just 2 days before the one-year anniversary of their meeting. John took a job as a patrolman in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. In January 1969, Julia became pregnant, and they welcomed their daughter, Julie. As Julie grew, she formed a very close bond with her father, and relatives noted that she would do anything to earn his approval. Father and daughter spent a lot of time together fishing, while Julia often felt sidelined in family life. During these times, she struggled with feelings of being an outsider. Although Julia hid her substance addiction, her erratic behavior raised concerns among those around her. Things worsened as Julia began to use more potent illegal additives. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, Julie's brother, John Patrick Scully, was born. The new baby quickly became the center of attention for their parents, leaving Julie feeling unloved and neglected. Meanwhile, Julia's substance abuse continued, and she fell into a deep depression. In 1973, overwhelmed, she took an entire pack of sleeping pills. Fortunately, John found her in time, administered first aid, and called for medical help. Julia was revived, but not only did the family learn of her addiction, the situation deteriorated further. She began to resemble a shell of her former self. Soon after, Julia attempted self-harm again due to depression, but this time, she also was saved. The issues between her parents did not go unnoticed by their children, especially by Julie, who was 9 years old at the time. During her birthday party, friends gathered to celebrate, but in the middle of the festivities, their father left to see his mistress. He had been having an affair for a while, viewing it as an escape from his growing disgust for his dependent wife. He stayed with Julia only for the sake of the children. During the party, the mistress arrived at their home to pick up John, and Julie saw her leaving with him. He seemed completely unconcerned that his secret was now obvious. This revelation hit Julie hard, and Julia began to blame herself for the situation. Julia struggled to understand what was really happening. During this time, Julie had once been an excellent student, started to fall to a C average in school. John then decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington. In here, Julie, a bright and beautiful girl, became very popular, but also fell in with a bad crowd. She started skipping school, and her grades continued to decline. By this time, she was 12 years old and already looked attractive, attracting the attention of many boys. All this was aggravated by the fact that their family lived in a disadvantaged area, which made her parents increasingly afraid for Julie, fearing she could become a victim of the addiction. One evening, Julie's friends were supposed to spend the night, but when the mother came to check on them, the schoolgirls were not in the room. Concerned, Julia contacted emergency services, and the police eventually located them in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother was deteriorating, resulting in frequent arguments. Her rebellious behavior also troubled her father. Julia entered treatment for her addiction. During Julia's absence, the home environment became more peaceful. However, despite Julie's early attempts to please her father, her rebellious nature intensified. She continued to skip classes and perform poorly academically due to spending more time with friends. When John learned of this, he was very upset. At the age of 14, Julie informed her father that she wanted to drop out of school. This decision likely stemmed from her feeling ignored by her parents. She was attractive and often the center of attention at parties, making her prioritize fun over her father's approval. By the age of 14, Julie had started living a sexual life. After graduating from high school, her parents began considering her future and special education needs. John helped her gain admission to a prestigious engineering school, known for its strict selection process. He personally spoke to the director to ensure she would be accepted without facing competition, emphasizing that she was the daughter of an indigenous person, which he hoped would earn her some concessions. In the fall of 1983, his efforts succeeded, and Julie enrolled in the engineering program. Meanwhile, her brother chose a different path. He joined the Navy as soon as he turned 16. During this time, Julie decided she was content with her life and dropped out of school to pursue financial independence. She began working and soon met a boyfriend. He was 6 years older than her. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married in November 1985, just a few months before Julie turned 18. Although marrying provided her with financial support and emotional stability, their union was kept secret, even from her father. When John eventually found out, he supported the marriage, believing it was a better choice for Julie than living with a dependent parent. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in 1988, and Julie had to move back in with her mother. Despite finding a new job, she did not contribute to her mother's living expenses. Julie became more beautiful than ever, attracting attention every time she was in public. Many people even mistook her for a model and often asked if she was one. Over time, she started to leverage her beauty. Though she felt fragile and vulnerable inside, she was desperately searching for love, but only found brief connections. Many men invited her out on dates and to various events. This trend continued in July 1989, when she attended a stylish party at a yacht owners club. There, she met Timothy "Tim" Nist, a man 11 years her senior. He was a successful businessman who owned his own yacht. In the early 1980s, he started a landscape design company, and his business thrived during the boom of the U.S. real estate market. Julie and Tim's relationship progressed rapidly, but it soon became evident that Julie was very jealous. One day, when Tim was at a bar with another girl, Julie arrived and immediately hit him, leaving a bruise on his face. She also attacked the girl, who was actually Tim's longtime secretary and just an employee helping with the business. Although the situation was tense, the conflict was eventually resolved. Besides, Julie aspired to be a model and saw an advertisement for a beauty contest in a newspaper. Eager to participate, she and Tim gathered her best photos to submit them to the magazine hosting the contest. Unfortunately, they later discovered that the contest was a scam. The magazine used fake ads to collect free photos for their men's section, which was on the last page. One day, Tim arrived at his office to find his secretary absent. To his surprise, Julie was sitting at her desk with a friendly smile, claiming that the secretary would no longer come to work and that Julie had taken over her job. This arrangement allowed Julie to work from home, giving her more freedom and financial independence. Meanwhile, she kept checking her email to see if another magazine had responded to the beauty pageant, but there was no response at all, which made her very frustrated. Eventually, feeling cheated out of her prize, she went to a magazine's office and confronted the editor, demanding an explanation for the lack of recognition for her supposed win. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to include them in the next issue. Julie told everyone about what happened and began to prepare for the competition, which later took place in an elite hotel. At the contest, 12 finalists participated, including Julie. Unfortunately, the judges selected other contestants and only one person voted for her. Despite this setback, Julie formed a friendship with Cheryl Chouplas Hood, the magazine editor, and became this magazine's face, appearing on billboards throughout the city. This exposure increased her popularity, leading to numerous modeling job offers. Julie quickly gained fame, and her career flourished until the fall of 1990. She continued to work for SEMA while winning awards in smaller beauty contests. However, failures awaited her on the big podium. On November 16, 1991, Julie married Tim when she was 23 years old. They enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and did not deny themselves anything until 1997. Julie's modeling career continued to grow, leading to more income and television appearances. However, she also began to struggle with alcohol abuse. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but overall, they shared love and understanding. Tim wanted children, and they had the financial means to support a family, but Julie was hesitant, fearing it might jeopardize her modeling career. In February 1995, she became pregnant. Despite her friends' concerns, she continued to drink and smoke during this time. On November 26, 1996, she gave birth to a daughter named Katie, which profoundly transformed her life, which Julie willingly accepted. During this time, Julia overcame her addictions and started to actively support her granddaughter. However, they frequently argued about parenting. Soon after, Julie began to struggle with postpartum depression, feeling unhappy because her pregnancy had affected her figure. She became withdrawn and didn't make an effort to return to her former self. Around the same time, her relationship with Tim started to deteriorate, especially in April of that year. They were compelled to see a family psychologist. Julie felt that the therapist favored Tim, but the therapist was actually trying to help her confront her issues and past traumas. Ultimately, the psychologist concluded that Tim was not spending enough time with Julie, putting their marriage at risk. Julie felt lonely and started reaching out to her friends. She came home intoxicated on November 1. This is the 7th year of Tim's annual cruise tradition, which they had maintained since their wedding. This year, they decided to move the trip up to celebrate the Christmas holidays. The cruise was intended to strengthen Julie and Tim's relationship. They left Katie with her grandparents and flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, a man named George Skiadopoulos, who worked in the ship's engineering department, noticed Julie. Although he held a low-ranking position, he introduced himself as the captain. The next day, he had made a bet with a friend that he could start a romantic relationship with Julie. At just 22 years old and fresh out of college, George was at the beginning of his engineering career, but he looked respectable enough for Julie to believe him. He falsely claimed to be 28 and fabricated a few accomplishments to impress her. At that time, Julie was 29 years old, and she quickly became close to George. Tim noticed their interactions but was accustomed to Julie being friendly with strangers, so he didn't think much of it and felt no jealousy. Before a party, George offered Julie a tour of the engine room. During the tour, they shared a kiss, but nothing more happened afterward. When Julie returned home, she excitedly told a family friend about her feelings, thinking it was just a brief attraction, since she believed she would never see George again. However, not long after, George sent Julie a seemingly innocent letter, and they began talking on the phone daily. He tried to persuade her that Tim wasn't good enough for her, These conversations were not hidden from Tim. He caught Julie a few times while she was on the phone, but chose to trust her without questioning what they discussed. This situation left Julie feeling conflicted. She was torn between the stability of the family and new sensations with a young lover whom she missed so much, which caused her to become more distant from her husband and daughter. Noticing the change in her behavior, Tim grew concerned and wanted to mend their relationship. On January 3, 1941, he planned a surprise birthday party for her 30th birthday. The celebration went well, with many friends attending. During the party, Julie requested another cruise as a gift, specifying a particular ship and date. Tim was unaware of her true intentions to meet George again. He agreed to her request. On February 13, Julie went on a cruise where she met George. After some intimate moments and returning home, Julie excitedly shared her experience with her friend Tony, who is also the godfather of Katie. Although he was trustworthy, it was hard for Tony to keep this secret to himself. Feeling a deep longing for George, Julie decided to visit him secretly. She framed the trip as a vacation with her mother and daughter. She revealed to her mother about her secret relationship, which led to disapproval. But this could not stop Julie. Initially, the plan was for Julie, Julia, and Katie to go to Florida together. However, by March 26, she left them behind and traveled to Puerto Rico, where she betrayed love of her husband. Upon returning, Julie began to communicate more openly with George. She would frequently talk to him on the phone, send flirty love letters via email, and even create a video sharing snippets of her life. All of this she did without hiding it from Tim, with whom she still lived. Using her husband's earnings, she started going to parties and drinking regularly. Tim noticed these changes and suggested that they see a family psychologist after 7 years of marriage. One day, Julie expressed her desire to break up with Tim, but he opposed the idea. She owned a share in Tim's business, which was generating about $1 million annually. Julie was in dire need of finances as George was planning military service, which in Greece lasts 20 months. She attempted to help George obtain a visa to the USA, but by that time, she could no longer afford it. Struggling with emotional issues, she started taking antidepressants, which made George very angry, and he forbade her from continuing the medication. To impress her new boyfriend, Julie decided to get in shape. However, she had trouble sleeping due to taking sleeping pills and other strong medications, which led her to lose about 10 kg. She hoped to return to modeling to earn money, but George was very jealous and opposed her pursuing this career. Consequently, Julie had to abandon her plans. No one supported her relationship with this Greek man, not even Cheryl, who had previously shown interest in her. In a separate incident, Tim was unable to access a project document. When Julie refused to let him into her room, he had to call the police for help. Despite her resistance, he retrieved what he needed for work. Julie became paranoid, believing that Tim had hired a detective to spy on her. The tension in their home escalated, and it seemed inevitable that they were heading toward a divorce. By midsummer, George and Julie secretly got engaged while they were in the United States. This was done secretly, although she didn't hide from anyone that she was going to move to Greece. During this time, Tim started receiving monthly bills of $67 for international phone calls. Eventually, he discovered that she had been unfaithful to him by an engineer from a cruise ship, and they had been communicating with him behind his back. This revelation made Tim furious, and he decided to expedite the divorce process to eliminate any complications. In response, Julie attempted to restrict Tim's communication with Katie. She aimed to gain full custody so she could leave for another country without any obstacles, which Tim strongly opposed. While they was trying to resolve their issues, Julie's lover George informed her that he had quit his job and planned to visit her in New Jersey. During this time, Julie was under significant stress due to ongoing conflicts with Tim, which even caused her hair to start falling out. However, she believed that all this was due to separation from her beloved. Additionally, she became increasingly paranoid and jealous, demanding constant communication and obsessing over other women in George's life. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship took on a more chaotic tone. He frequently asked Julie for money, pressuring her to spend more than she could afford. Because of this, she was forced to take money from Tim, while she completely limited him communication with their daughter. Tim went weeks without seeing her, which drove him to frustration. Meanwhile, George constantly deceived Julie about his financial situation and employment status. It was surprising how unattractive this man was, the beautiful Julie, who literally crouched before him and was ready to give up her well-established life for him. Julie's friends and family were puzzled by her behavior. They tried to convince her to rethink her feelings, as they couldn't comprehend why she would fall for a bald, unemployed man with rotten teeth who was manipulative, deceitful, and excessively jealous. Despite their concerns, Julie seemed infatuated with him. She planned to use her divorce settlement to pay for a professional hair transplant for her boyfriend and fix her own teeth. When Tim learned about her plans, he was outraged, especially since he felt Julie was involving Katie in this situation. He threatened that if she attempted to leave, he would take Katie away, and she would never see their child again. This threat likely dampened Julie's enthusiasm momentarily. She even told her friends that she had ended her relationship with George. However, this was only a temporary setback. A few weeks later, she went to Greece with George to further develop their relationship. During this time, Julie met the parents of George, and they enjoyed the weekend. Because of the religious views of the boyfriend's parents, Julie was forced to hide her marriage and her daughter, as well as her modeling past. When she returned home, she dreamed of a future with her lover. On December 1st, she planned to leave Tim and their shared home. That day, she also left Katie and checked into a hotel. After using a significant amount of psychoactive drugs, Julie traveled to Greece on December 8, 1998. While there, she and her partner made plans for marriage and their life together. George convinced her to open a joint bank account, claiming she needed help with the language barrier. In her infatuation, Julie deposited $80,000 into the account and left an additional $18,000 in cash for expenses. This was all the money she had, and then she vanished without a trace. On January 8, George called Julie's friend to report that she was missing. He said she was supposed to meet him near McDonald's for a snack but never arrived, despite him waiting for several hours. At that time, they didn't have mobile phones to reach her. After a lengthy search, George contacted the police to report his fiancée's disappearance. Shortly before these events, Julie called her friend to express how much she missed Katie and to share that she was having issues with her fiancé, George. The friend sensed that Julie was considering leaving George, and she thought that Julie would return to the US soon. However, Julie never came back. Amid this, George's call was concerning. He informed her friend that Julie had disappeared and left her passport in the car, which the police later took. The problem was that George couldn't locate the officer who had taken the document, making his story seem suspicious. In response, the friend contacted Tim, who was the only one who could provide assistance. Tim quickly understood that Julie was in trouble. The last time she had reached out to her family in the US was on January 7, and since then, no one had heard from her. Julie's mother described George as pathetic. Not only was he unattractive, but he also seemed to lack self-control. There was an incident where George became aggressive towards Julie, when during an argument with Julie, he yelled at her, grabbed her by the throat and pushed her against the wall. He only released her when he heard the threat of police involvement. At this time, Julie attempted to end the relationship. Following this, Julia called the police, and George was deported. But then, despite the circumstances, Julie traveled to Greece to support her boyfriend. She defended him in every way possible, even taking responsibility for the attack. When she learned that Julie was missing, Julia suspected that her daughter's boyfriend was involved in her disappearance. George pretended to help with the search for Julie. During this time, Julie's family tried to reach the American embassy in Athens, but they faced a significant language barrier since no one at the Greek police stations involved in the investigation spoke English. In the United States, the FBI became involved in the case. It was revealed that Julie's passport had been with George the entire time, although he claimed he found it later. When George learned that the FBI was now investigating, he changed his story and said that Julie's documents had been stolen. His behavior grew increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unsuccessful. The couple was scheduled to get married on January 23, 1999. During this time, news outlets were covering the story of the missing American woman. George became agitated when he spoke on the phone with Julie's friend, who had alerted the media, George insisting he was innocent. He even gave statements to the press and participated in interviews to defend himself. 16 days later, George, the main suspect, was in the interrogation room. He continued to stick to the story he had shared with the media. However, after 4 hours of questioning, the police got him to confess to killing his lover. He claimed that it was an accident. George seemed to genuinely regret the incident, even shedding tears during the interrogation. Despite this, his account was filled with inconsistencies. At times, he insisted that Julie had not disappeared, only to later admit his guilt and then deny any involvement again. George explained that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became unhappy and missed her home. She expressed a strong desire to return, and despite George's attempts to support her, her distress only deepened, which worried him. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Julie was constantly in tears. Furthermore, George's mother discovered that Julie had an ex-husband and a daughter in America, which made her feel disgusted with Julie. She openly expressed her disapproval to George. He was ultimately persuaded by his mother to leave Julie with such a complicated past. Their relationship was fraught with arguments, and they eventually were evicted from their hotel due to their conflicts. However, George exacerbated the situation. He prevented her from contacting her family and friends, and physically abused her. It became evident that his mother struggled with schizophrenia and frequently required hospitalization. A lot of her issues seemed to have been passed down to George, who had an inflated sense of self-worth. As a result, he exhibited arrogant behavior. His manipulative tendencies were often noticed by friends and family. He disappeared at the slightest disagreement and immediately attacked his beloved. Besides, there was an incident where George's mother herself had a badly injured hand. But she justified herself by saying that she accidentally cut herself. Despite the abuse, Julie remained in the relationship. On January 8, 1999, the couple embarked on a long trip to Athens. As they drove along a deserted two-lane highway, their calm conversation spiraled into another argument. George eventually stopped in a remote area of the road where they were isolated from other drivers. George got out of the car and immediately attacked Julie, choking her in an attempt to silence her screams. George later told the police that it felt like he was watching the incident from outside his body. He felt completely powerless and couldn't stop until Julie showed no signs of life. Although he claimed the attack lasted only a few seconds, forensic experts indicated that strangulation typically takes at least 3 minutes. Afterward, George was in shock and contemplated burning her body and scattering the ashes into the sea from a cliff, intending to jump afterward to be with her. However, he ultimately abandoned this plan. Instead, he found himself in an interrogation room, which revealed his guilt. George claimed he had tried to take his own life using an air gun, jumping in front of a truck and through an overdose of medication, but he was unsuccessful. Following the murder, he treated her body with indifference. He placed her in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he purchased gasoline. He then returned to the scene, dragged her body away from the road near two small lakes, poured gasoline on her, and attempted to set her on fire. However, the fire didn't ignite because it started to rain. At one point, he thought about throwing her body into the lake, but instead placed the charred remains back in the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. George discovered a large suitcase intended for travel and decided to pack the body inside it. By this time, rigor mortis had already set in, and the body would not bend. Additionally, the head would not fit into the suitcase, so George resorted to cutting it off. He grabbed the head by the hair and raised it to the level of his face, and later confessed to the police that he was horrified by the sight of her vacant eyes. Yet he still found her beautiful. He kissed her on the lips before placing the body into the suitcase. Afterward, he burned the suitcase and discarded it in a swamp, leaving the head behind. George then traveled to Kavala and threw Julie's head into the Aegean Sea. Tim and his family were informed of George's confession 19 days after Julie's disappearance. George, Julie's lover and intended husband, guided detectives to the murder site, where they discovered her remains. Tim traveled to Greece to bring her body back to her homeland. During this time, George confessed to the crime on live television. His mother suffered a stroke upon learning of his actions. Tim's father even remarked that George should have died alongside Julie. Despite this, many articles unfairly blamed Julie for the tragedy. Greek authorities described this murder as one of the most horrific cases known at the time. George's lawyers attempted to argue that he was insane, citing his mother's schizophrenia as a possible reason for his mental state. At one point, George expressed a desire for the death penalty, but Greece does not have capital punishment. In the United States, Tim became a source of support for Julie's family and friends. Despite Julie's infidelity, he proved to be a decent person. Friends of Julie, who remembered her fondly, believed that George initially exploited her for financial gain. When he found out that her husband was rich, he forced her to divorce for a tidy sum that the woman had to invest in his business. Before her death, Julie realized George's true intentions and decided not to invest in his projects, a decision that ultimately cost her life. George's trial began on November 27, 1999. Since 2009, cases in Greece have been heard by 3 judges instead of juries, which has expedited the justice process. Notably, no defense witnesses were present during the hearings. On December 6, the court found George guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it seemed that justice had been served, the Greek legal system faltered. In 2002, George appealed his conviction, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. His sentence was subsequently reduced to 23 years, and he was granted the right to appeal again. By 2007, he was released and now lives with his new family in Kavala. The case of Julie Scully is a heartbreaking tragedy, with haunting details of the complex relationship. From a happy marriage, she began an affair with George Skiadopoulos, which led to irreparable arguments and conflicts that eventually led to her death. The case is not only a story of personal loss, but also a reflection of the complex elements of love, trust, and power in relationships. The media and public continue to investigate to clarify what really happened, but the story of Julie will forever be a painful reminder of the tragic consequences of toxic relationships. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will delve into a new case. The case of Bridget Frisbie. Bridget Frisbie was born in December 1993 in Katy, Texas, USA. Shortly after her birth, her parents abandoned her, and she was placed in an orphanage. When Bridget was 18 months old, Robert Frisbee and Catherine visited the orphanage. After years of trying without being able to have children, they decided to make happy the baby abandoned by her parents. Catherine had always longed for a daughter, and from the moment she first met Bridget, she felt a deep connection. Without hesitation, Robert and Catherine decided to adopt Bridget. From then on, they providing Bridget with a family full of love and protection. Bridget was an active and kind-hearted child. From a young age, she developed a passion for horseback riding, poetry, and painting. Her positive and friendly nature helped her make many friends. Her adoptive parents often wondered how her biological parents could have abandoned such a wonderful child. However, despite her cheerful demeanor, Bridget faced significant challenges throughout her life. When Bridget was 10 years old, her adoptive mother passed away after battling a long-term illness for several years, despite always being cared for and encouraged by family. Catherine's death was a devastating loss for Bridget, who had seen Catherine as her real mother. During this difficult period, father and daughter grew closer, supporting each other as they navigated their grief. Robert deeply loved his daughter, and over the years, they built a warm and trusting relationship. As Bridget grew older, her rebellious nature became more and more evident. Robert struggled to keep up with her boundless energy, but she continued to embrace life with enthusiasm. Despite their differences, they maintained a close and loving relationship. Bridget was an active and lively student. She excelled academically and had ambitious dreams for the future, much to her father's delight. She aspired to attend college and build an independent life. On April 3, 2011, a group of teenagers were riding motorcycles along the edge of a Texas forest. This was a strip of land planted near the family's home. The area was usually used for riding dirt bikes and ATVs. Towards the end of the trip, the young athletes saw something suspicious off to the side of the trail. Venturing slightly into the woods, they made a horrifying discovery: a human body. Realizing the importance of preserving evidence, the group refrained from disturbing the scene. They observed blood on the girl's clothes and head, and it appeared that someone had attempted to hide the body by covering it with branches and leaves. However, the concealment was so poorly done that the body was visible even from a considerable distance. The police were immediately called to the scene, where the high school students waited for their arrival. None of the teens recognized the girl. The officers discovered that the victim had no identification, making it impossible to determine her identity at the time. During a cursory inspection of the area, the detectives assumed that the massacre had been carried out right there. The victim had been attacked and left in the forest. A forensic examination later confirmed that there were no signs of abuse violence, and all of her belongings, including valuables, were still with her. This ruled out robbery and abuse assault as motives, so they suspect that the attack was related to personal hostility or jealousy. The police immediately investigated the victim's identity. They noticed the victim appeared to be just under 20 years old. She was found lying on the ground, partially covered with branches and dirt. A large wound to the head was the only visible injury, indicating a fatal blow that killed the young schoolgirl on the spot. The wound was caused by a 9mm bullet at close range, which passed through her head. Near the body, investigators discovered an empty 9mm ammunition box. This was the only clue with which the detectives had to start searching for the culprit of the tragedy. While examining the crime scene, investigators noticed another peculiar detail. A few meters from the body, a small patch of the forest floor had its top layer of soil removed, leaving a bare spot. It appeared as though someone had started digging, but stopped abruptly. The reason for this was unclear. It was possible the killer had intended to bury the body but was interrupted or frightened away. However, the police acknowledged that this detail might have been unrelated to the girl's murder. To identify the deceased, investigators began reaching out to local residents, They went door to door, speaking with people who lived near the forest. News of the brutal murder quickly spread through the community, causing widespread concern. The police used the media to inform the public about the incident, which had occurred just a few hundred meters from some homes, leaving families horrified. Such a crime was unprecedented in their peaceful area. Residents were asked if they had noticed any suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar individuals heading toward the forest or behaving strangely. Meanwhile, deputies from the sheriff's department visited dozens of homes and interviewed numerous witnesses. However, no valuable information emerged on the first day of the investigation. Just as the officers were beginning to lose hope of finding a helpful lead, a woman from a nearby settlement provided a significant clue. She explained that the night before the body was found, she had been relaxing with friends in her backyard. Between 2 and 3 a.m., she heard a loud noise resembling an explosion. Her friends also confirmed hearing the same sound. According to the witnesses' recollections that night, no one attached much importance to this extraneous noise, since she lived next to a forest area and knew that it could have been hunters. Moreover, the noise seemed distant, and she wasn't even sure if it was a bullet sound. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, no additional information surfaced. The police returned to the station and began searching their database to determine if the murdered woman was listed as missing. Given the circumstances, it was likely her details had been added only a few days earlier. Unfortunately, during these checks, officers were unable to identify the victim found in the forest. The case took a turn the next day. On the morning of April 4, 2011, Robert Frisbee went to the sheriff's department to report that he hadn't been able to contact his 17-year-old daughter, Bridget, for over a day. He was deeply concerned, especially after hearing about a body discovered in the nearby forest, not far from their home. At this time, the identity of the body remained unknown, so detectives immediately communicated with Robert. He revealed that he had been unable to reach his adopted daughter, Bridget, through her mobile phone or social media since the previous evening. Bridget had planned to spend the night at a friend's house 2 days before Robert reported her missing to the police. Robert believed she was mature enough to make such plans and assumed she had intended to meet her boyfriend that night. He didn't object to her having fun. However, after leaving home, Bridget failed to contact her father. She didn't confirm her arrival, let him know how she was, or even say goodnight. This lack of communication was unusual, as their family shared a warm and trusting relationship. According to Robert, such behavior seemed uncharacteristic and caused concern. Robert was aware of an unwritten rule often followed by the police: they are unlikely to act on a disappearance reported earlier than 24 hours after the person goes missing. With this in mind, he decided to wait before going to the police station. During this time, he repeatedly tried contacting his daughter on her mobile phone and reaching out to her friends, but all his efforts were met with silence, without any clue. When Robert provided detectives with a description of his daughter, they immediately noted Bridget's striking resemblance to the body they had found. Robert was shown photographs from the scene of the incident and heartbreakingly confirmed that it was Bridget. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she left home. The discovery was an emotional devastation for Robert. Years earlier, he had lost his wife to a serious illness and still deeply missed her. His daughter had been his source of hope and joy, but now that light was gone too. With this confirmation, the victim was officially identified. The police then questioned Robert to piece together the events. Robert said that he last saw his daughter on April 2, 2011, when she was still at home. He had just bought her a pair of soft blue leggings, which she tried on before going out for a walk. That evening, Bridget's friend, Kendall Suo, came over for dinner with the family. After the meal, the two girls asked Robert to take them to a party. He agreed, but when they arrived, they discovered that the club was closed to young people. Unable to attend, Robert took the two girls home at around 10 p.m. Kendall left shortly after, picked up by another young man who planned to return home by midnight. Bridget and Kendall had planned to go to the bus stop to meet Bridget's boyfriend. However, Robert did not wait for the young man to arrive and went to bed. He set his alarm for midnight, and when he woke up, he found Bridget still at home. She told him that her friend was late, which worried her. Robert reassured his daughter and told her to go to bed. After seeing Bridget start getting ready for bed, he locked the door and went back to sleep. At around 3 a.m., Robert woke up feeling uneasy. He checked around the house and realized that Bridget was not there. Thinking she might have gone out with friends, he left the garage door unlocked so she could get inside without waking him. When he tried to call her to ask when she would be home, he realized that he couldn't find his phone. He thought that his daughter might have taken his mobile phone so as not to leave home without a means of communication. He tried using the internet and social media to contact her, but she didn't respond to his calls or messages. Concerned, Robert attempted to track his phone's location through GPS to ensure his daughter was safe, but he couldn't manage to do so. His anxiety grew as he realized she was unlikely to stick to her curfew. He decided to wait until morning, hoping she would return and resolve the situation on her own. Unfortunately, when he woke up on next day, Bridget was still not home. Robert began calling several of her friends and contacts, but no one could tell him exactly where she was or what had happened. By that evening, he read online that a group of teenagers on motorcycles had discovered the body of an unidentified girl near his family home. This news made Robert even more anxious. Although he tried to push away the distressing thoughts, the possibility that his daughter might be the victim tormented him. The next morning, he went to the police station and confirmed that the murdered girl was indeed his daughter. The devastating news left him shattered. He became unable to sleep or focus on work and even started keeping a loaded weapon by his bedside. After Robert's testimony, the detectives finally had their first lead. The suspect was Kendall So, a school friend of Bridget's, with whom she had spoken on the evening before her disappearance. Bridget's father stated that he had known Kendall for a long time and had never observed any signs of aggression or dangerous behavior in him. According to Robert, Kendall was a responsible high school student with no history of criminal activity or bad influences. He was well behaved, a good student, and always treated Bridget with respect. Her father felt confident trusting his daughter with Kendall, believing she was safe in his company. Robert was certain that Kendall could not be the killer. In contrast, Robert believed that a more likely suspect was Bridget's ex-boyfriend, Valley Jonathan Eason. From the start, Bridget and Jonathan had a troubled relationship. Jonathan was a bad influence and was suspected of using soft banned substance. He was frequently involved in problematic incidents and had a history of provoking conflicts. From the beginning of their acquaintance, he often displayed threatening behavior. Later, a third person came into the picture, Zach Richards, another old friend of Bridget's, with whom she had started dating shortly before her death. Based on Robert's testimony, investigators quickly identified several suspects who needed to be thoroughly investigated. Detectives immediately began questioning these young men to determine their whereabouts at the time of the murder. The first person they approached was Kendall, one of the last people to see Bridget alive. Kendall had no prior issues with the law. When contacted by the police, he willingly agreed to come to the station and provide his statement. He confirmed Robert's account, explaining how he visited Bridget's house and then went to the club with Bridget. According to Kendall, he left the house shortly after Robert dropped them off at the club. He claimed that their plans had suddenly changed because another friend was to join them. Kendall expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation and agreed to provide DNA samples and fingerprints as needed. He also mentioned that on the evening in question, Bridget was upset due to a recent argument with her ex-boyfriend, Jonathan Eason. Bridget and Jonathan had been in a relationship for several months, but it had been troubled from the start. Jonathan often accused her of cheating, which eventually led to their breakup. However, he seemed to hold a grudge against her and would use any chance to hurt her feelings. The situation was further complicated because they attended the same class. The police verified Kendall's alibi, which checked out. Despite this, they kept him on the list of suspects and decided to scrutinize some of his statements further. The next person the detectives investigated was Bridget's ex-boyfriend Jonathan. Several witnesses from Bridget's close circle had mentioned him during their interviews. When the police attempted to contact Jonathan, they couldn't reach him. They decided to visit his home, but upon arrival, they found the house empty, with signs suggesting it had been abandoned in a hurry. This discovery raised serious concerns. The back wall of the family home was covered with round holes resembling bullet holes. Based on the number of holes, investigators concluded that the bullet holes were either from a semi-automatic weapon or the attacker has been deliberately impacting the front of the house for a long time. During their investigation, they discovered that about a week before Bridget's murder, Jonathan had been targeted by 3 unknown individuals in a car. They had opened attack on him, but he managed to hide in his room, avoiding injury. Following the attack, Jonathan reported the incident to the police. Despite the investigators' best efforts, the case remained unsolved. The only evidence collected at the scene were spent cartridges and several bullets. Neighbors revealed that Jonathan moved out the day after the attack, fearing for his safety. The police suspected that these events might be connected. On March 14, the active phase of the search for Jonathan began. He became the main suspect in this case. By that time, detectives had already managed to visit the school where he studied. Bridget also studied there. The administration reported that Jonathan had not been in class in recent days. Investigators decided to talk to other students from his class. Police officers tried to find out where Jonathan went after the attack. Detectives met Alexander Olivieri, who introduced himself as a close friend of Bridget. According to him, they had recently met, and since then, they often communicated. Alexander immediately said that during her relationship with Jonathan, Bridget repeatedly feared for her life and health, as Jonathan behaved aggressively. Even after their breakup, Jonathan continued to pursue her. They often saw each other at school, and Jonathan did not miss the opportunity to offend her. All this often ended in quarrels and confrontations. Bridget just wanted to forget about the relationship and the unpleasant breakup, but her ex-boyfriend prevented this with all his might. According to Alexander, Jonathan was capable of causing harm to Bridget. Investigators tried to find out where Alexander was on the night of Bridget's murder. According to him, he was supposed to meet her that very night. They were going to pick up her boyfriend, Zach Richards, from the bus station. Zach was returning from visiting relatives who lived in a neighboring state. Alexander claimed that he arrived late to Bridget's house with another friend named Alan Perez. Bridget had promised to wait for them near the house, but he did not see her anywhere. She ignored their calls, so they left, assuming she had either already gone to bed. They met Zach and drove around the city for several hours before returning home at around 5 a.m. According to the forensic expert, by that time, Bridget had already been killed. Alexander learned of Bridget's death from the news. Detectives then questioned Alan, who told a similar story. However, his version slightly differed. He claimed that after meeting Zach, they played computer games all night and did not drive around the city. These discrepancies raised suspicions. Detectives added Alexander and Alan to the list of suspects, as their stories did not align, and no one could confirm their alibis. Nevertheless, Jonathan remained the main witness investigators wanted to question. Detectives quickly discovered that Jonathan's mother had not left the city after the attack on their home. Instead, she had moved in with a family friend for a while her son was sent to relatives in Austin, Texas. Law enforcement officers quickly found Jonathan's mother, who admitted that her son often got into trouble because of his bad character. She confirmed that the attack on the house was clearly directed against him, as the bullets were aimed at the side of the house where his room was. According to her, Jonathan had gotten into a fight before the attack, so the attackers were most likely connected to this incident. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove this during the investigation. The relationship between Jonathan and his mother was far from ideal. Despite sending him to Austin, she did not keep in touch with him and did not know his exact whereabouts. However, she provided the police with an address to help them begin their search for Jonathan. Help for the investigation came from an unexpected source. Alan's lawyer approached the police and stated that his client had important information regarding the case. Alan was willing to provide this information in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Detectives considered the information potentially useful and agreed to the terms. According to Alan, there was a direct connection between Bridget's murder and the drive-by attack at Jonathan's house. Alan revealed that both he and Alexander had joined the National Guard, where they learned how to handle weapons. After mastering basic skills, Alexander continued his education at school and met Bridget. Bridget confided in Alexander about her problems with her ex-boyfriend, Jonathan. Together, they came up with a solution. According to Alan, in the incident that happened at Jonathan's house, it was Bridget who directly acted. Alex used his semi-automatic weapon, while Alan was also present in the car but only as an observer. Unfortunately for the entire group, Bridget started talking too much, putting everyone at risk of being exposed. On April 2, 2011, Alexander planned to meet Bridget to confront her about how her loose talk had nearly jeopardized them all. Considering his training in the National Guard and aspirations for a career in the military, Alexander feared Bridget's behavior could ruin his future. Meanwhile, Jonathan had already reported the situation to the police, and an active investigation was underway. Before that, after completing his training, Alexander began carrying a 9mm Beretta in a holster under his clothes. That evening, Alexander and Alan went to pick up Bridget from her house. They convinced her to get into the car by pretending they will to pick up her boyfriend Zach from the bus station. Initially, Bridget refused to go, so Alexander followed her into the house, determined to get her into the car by any necessary. While this was happening, Alan hid in the back seat of the Chevrolet Suburban under a large blanket. Eventually, Alexander managed to persuade Bridget to get into the car. They drove to an isolated area. On the way, Alexander started to put pressure on Bridget and accused her of the fact that her chatter could cost them all dearly. Upon arriving at the secluded location, they walked to a nearby wooded area. Alexander brought a shovel and flashlight and, together with Bridget, entered the forest. After some time, Alan got out of the car and quietly followed them, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen by Bridget. According to Alan, Alexander forced Bridget to dig, intimidating her and insisting it was urgent. While they were digging, Alexander suddenly pulled out a weapon and aimed it at the back of Bridget's head. Alan initially thought Alexander was trying to scare Bridget as a way of teaching her a lesson, but to his shock, Alexander pulled the trigger, killing her instantly. After the murder, Alexander hurried back to the car, taking the shovel and flashlight with him. He destroyed Bridget's phone and discarded the weapon, likely somewhere in the forest. Alan was stunned and confronted Alexander, angrily accusing him of what he had done. However, Alexander threatened Alan, warning him to stay silent or face consequences. Alexander then took all the items involved in the murder back to his home. Later, around 4 a.m., they picked up Bridget's boyfriend Zach from the bus station as originally planned. That night, Alexander invited a third friend to spend the night at his place. The following day, Alexander convinced Alan to work together to create a shared alibi. They agreed to stick to their story when speaking with the police. Alexander believed this plan would deceive the detectives. To further mislead the investigation, he decided to shift suspicion onto Bridget's argumentative ex-boyfriend, Jonathan. Alan admitted that he and Alexander had willingly participated in an attack at Jonathan's house to help Bridget. However, Alexander hadn't anticipated that Bridget would tell others about the incident. According to Alan's confession, Alexander saw no other solution than to kill Bridget to protect his future. Later, investigators questioned Zach, Bridget's boyfriend. Zach confessed that he had known about the attack at Jonathan's house. He also confirmed that Bridget had started sharing the story with others. Bridget had even considered posting about it on social media to intimidate Jonathan, which enraged Alexander. He repeatedly begged Bridget to drop these plans, but she refused to listen. On the evening of the meeting, Zach knew Bridget was supposed to arrive with 2 friends, but when the car arrived, she wasn't in it. When asked about Bridget's whereabouts, Alexander said he couldn't reach her. A few days later, Zach learned of Bridget's death. Alexander Olivieri was immediately arrested, and during a search of his home, police were unable to find the weapon believed to have been used in the car attack, as well as the weapon used to kill Bridget. However, they did find instructions for a weapon model that matched the shell casings discovered at the crime scene. Investigators also recovered a shovel that Bridget had used to dig a hole in the forest before being shot. Her DNA was confirmed to be on it. A thorough inspection of Alexander's car revealed numerous fabric fibers. However, Alexander never admitted to his actions. Instead, he attempted to shift the blame onto Alan. At this time, the prosecutor's office presented strong evidence disproving his claims. During the investigation, video recordings from 2010 were uncovered, showing Alexander demonstrating his use weapon skills with the same type of weapon used to kill Bridget, and in the attack at Jonathan's house. FBI agents took an active part in the investigation. A few days before the trial, they presented the results of fiber analysis conducted on materials collected from Alexander's car. The fibers matched the artificial fur on the victim's clothing. Bridget had been wearing a bright and distinctive outfit, making it easy to trace the source of the fibers. Additional evidence has strengthened the case against Alexander. Alexander's lawyer advised him to remain composed during the trial. He chose not to testify and never confessed to the murder. His cold demeanor made him appear calculating and unfeeling. On August 1, 2012, Alexander was found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Bridget's father deemed the sentence fair and expressed hope that Alexander would never be released. As promised by the police, Alan was not prosecuted for any of the incidents described. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Giddings. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984 in Tacoma Park, Maryland. She grew up with her 2 older sisters, Sarah and Caitlin. Her parents, Karen and William, maintained a warm and friendly atmosphere in the family. From a young age, she was always studious and religious. She was a member of St. Mary's Catholic Church and attended church from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 2002, at the age of 18, Lauren graduated from high school. That same year, she went to Georgia to attend an academy, where she studied until 2006. After leaving the academy, she returned home and worked at the National Public Policy Center in Washington. In 2008, she returned to Georgia to study law at Mercer University. Lauren was a blue-eyed, blonde with an athletic build who loved nature and animals, especially her pet dog, a Pekingese. Her relatives described her as a kind person who respected others' opinions. Sarah later noted that during college, Lauren transformed from a shy person into an active young woman with many friends. She was the pride of her family, and they had high hopes for her. However, her move to Georgia set off a series of unfortunate incidents that led to a tragic end. Mercer University is located in Macon, a city in central Georgia, right across from Lauren's dorm. Most of the people living in the dormitories are university students, and they usually know each other. Among them was Stephen Mark McDaniel, who lived near Lauren's room and was also in law school. Both are members of the Federalist Society, an organization of some 60,000 lawyers, both those studying and those already practicing. Lauren served as president of the society, while Stephen served as vice president. This was their only relationship. Stephen was known to be quiet. He was not very social and rarely drank. Lauren, on the other hand, was very attractive, had many interests, and maintained a busy schedule. Before they met at university, Stephen and Lauren had very different lives. Stephen was born on September 9, 1985 in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents, Glenda and William, worked in a factory. He was a bright child who valued cleanliness and organization. Until he was 13, he sang in the church choir in his hometown. Stephen aspired to write a novel, pursue a career in criminal law, and ultimately become a federal judge. After completing high school, he enrolled in law school in 2008, where he met Lauren. He had worked up the courage to ask her out a few times, but Lauren had kindly declined, explaining that she was dating David, a lawyer from Atlanta who was 20 years her senior. They started dating in 2007, before she went to college, when she interned at the law firm where he worked. After she moved to Georgia, David followed her, and their relationship continued. To discourage Stephen from pursuing her, Lauren mentioned that she and David planned to leave the city after graduation and live together. On May 11, 2011, Lauren fulfilled one of her biggest dreams, graduating with a Juris Doctorate. Her next goal was to obtain a license to practice as a lawyer, which required passing a challenging exam. As she prepared for the exam, everything went smoothly, and she felt confident about her future. However, she knew she would soon need to leave the city. Stephen silently accepted this fact. On the surface, he appeared calm, but in his mind, he had other plans. In June, Caitlin got married in Maryland, and Lauren attended the wedding. Soon after, she returned to her dormitory in Georgia to focus on studying for her upcoming exams. On the evening of June 25, David received an email from Lauren. In the email, she mentioned feeling uneasy and sensing that something strange was happening in her house. That reminded her of a similar experience she had over a year ago. At the time, she told her sister Caitlin that she suspected someone had broken into her home and gone through her belongings. At this point, Lauren's family and friends knew she was busy studying for exams, so they weren't worried when she stopped communicating. The last time anyone saw her was on Saturday, June 25, 2011, at a store. Caitlin sent her a few messages, but didn't think much about the lack of response. Caitlin believed she was too busy to respond. It wasn't until Wednesday evening, June 29, that David and her relatives began to worry because she had been silent for so long. David called Caitlin to ask if she had heard from Lauren, which worried her, as she had also tried to contact Lauren to no avail. She then contacted some of Lauren's friends, but no one had any information. Ashley, a friend of Lauren's, went to knock on her room, but no one answered, and it was quiet inside. Curious, she looked for Lauren's car and found it missing. The 2004 Mitsubishi was usually parked where Lauren always left it. Ashley remembered that Lauren had shown her where the spare key was in case of an emergency, so she used it to get into the apartment. Everything was in order. Lauren's personal belongings, phone, wallet, passport, and computer were in their usual places. Only Lauren was missing. While everyone was frantically searching for Lauren and trying to find clues about her whereabouts, Stephen entered the apartment. He stayed for a while to observe and chat with a few people before leaving. Ashley then discovered that Lauren's phone was dead, so she plugged it in to charge. Once the phone turned on, she checked it and saw that the last calls were made on June 25, 4 days earlier. Realizing it was time to involve the authorities, she called 911. A few minutes later, police officers from Mercer University arrived and relayed the information to the Macon police. After midnight, police officers, along with Lauren's friends and neighbors, began searching for her. At 3 a.m., after a thorough check of the dormitory area, the police left without any news about Lauren. Caitlin became worried and decided to inform her parents. Her father quickly got in the car and drove to Macon to file a missing person report. After her father filed the report, the detectives began their investigation. They drove to the dormitory where Lauren lived but couldn't find a parking space, so they parked in front of a dumpster. When investigators entered Lauren's room, they used luminol, a chemical that can detect blood, to conduct a test. They sprayed luminol on the walls, floors, and some objects in Lauren's living room, kitchen, and bedroom. However, things took a turn for the worse when they entered the bathroom and found the floor reacting violently to the luminol. At this point, everyone realized this was a crime scene and that something terrible had happened to Lauren. Meanwhile, friends and family continued to search for her. When interviewing Stephen, he described Lauren as a good and honest person, but admitted that he did not know where she was. According to Stephen, she had gone jogging and was attacked by a criminal. At the time he was sharing this, a garbage truck arrived. However, they were unable to collect the trash because a police car had parked in the wrong place and blocked the entrance to the trash bin. This was a pivotal moment that helped investigators quickly uncover the truth about what had happened to Lauren. Several detectives, having found nothing in Lauren's apartment and returning to their car, suddenly sensed a foul odor. It was the smell of death. They traced the odor to the garbage containers and began to investigate them. Inside one black plastic bag, they discovered a decomposing human torso. After examining it, the detectives concluded that it was likely the remains of a female, probably belonging to Lauren. While Stephen was talking to a reporter, a press officer interrupted to announce that the police had just discovered a body in a trash can behind the house. Initially confused and silent for a few seconds, Stephen then asked again about the body. He stammered that he needed to sit down, turned away from the camera, walked a short distance, and sat down near some bushes. Throughout this, the media operator captured his reactions. He appeared pale and was visibly shaking. Then, on the night of June 30, Stephen voluntarily went to the police station to provide a statement. The questioning lasted for 12 long hours. When asked about Lauren, he said he always noticed when she left or entered the dormitory. Even though he did not speak to her directly, he could hear or see her passing by his window. Furthermore, he claimed that he was always aware of all the activities in the dormitory. After being questioned, Stephen allowed the police to search his home, including his bedroom, where they discovered a rope, several weapons, blood-stained blue gloves, a master key to open the apartment door, and a pair of women's underwear. The investigators also seized Stephen's car, where they found more bloodstains. They found his computer, which contained conversations on a blog under the alias Sun. In this blog, he wrote about women and violence. In another post, Stephen discussed a situation that seemed to involve Lauren. He mentioned that he had been consumed by thoughts of one person for a long time, someone he wanted to protect from harm. If given the chance, he would have fought against anything that could hurt her without hesitation. But his mental struggles prevented him from doing so. He couldn't even confess his feelings to her, leaving him to watch her from afar. On Stephen's computer, many compromising photos were discovered, including pictures of Lauren. Additionally, a hacksaw with bloodstains was found in the tool cabinet, suggesting that a disturbing situation had occurred. Detectives concluded that Stephen had committed a heinous crime against Lauren. The evidence collected was sufficient to officially arrest Stephen McDaniel on July 2, 2011. On July 6, DNA tests showed that body parts found in a trash can belonged to Lauren. In August 2011, Stephen was charged with murder, Police thoroughly searched the dormitory and surrounding areas for other body parts, but found nothing more. Despite overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence during the early stages of his detention. After examining the contents of Stephen's computer, investigators discovered that he had been monitoring Lauren's accounts and social media. In addition to the murder charge, on August 23, 2011, Stephen was charged with 7 more counts and was ordered to post bail of $850,000, a huge amount of money for him and his family. In February 2013, the prosecutor's office announced that they would not seek the death penalty, at the request of Lauren's family. In 2014, just a week before his trial, Stephen surprised everyone by pleading guilty. The decision to plead guilty was part of a deal with prosecutors in which he agreed to accept responsibility for Lauren's death in exchange for dropping several other charges against him. Nearly 3 years after her murder, he recounted what really happened. Stephen said that on the morning of June 26, 2011, he entered Lauren's apartment while she was sleeping. He sat on her bed to watch her. When she woke up and saw him, she tried to stay calm and pleaded with him not to hurt her. Instead of leaving, he grabbed Lauren by the neck and squeezed tightly. She fought back desperately to escape. They both fell to the floor, and her legs got trapped under the bed, which worked to Stephen's advantage since she couldn't kick him. However, she managed to hit him with her hands and pulled off his mask. Fear engulfed her when she realized the attacker was her neighbor, Stephen, a fellow law student and vice president of the same organization she led. Once a shy and reserved guy who had asked her out, he had transformed into a terrifying figure. He violently grabbed her by the neck in an attempt to strangle her. Despite Lauren's desperate pleas for him to stop, he ignored her cries and continued to tighten his grip for several minutes. When she fell still, he released her at 4:30. Stephen then dragged Lauren's body into the bathroom, placed her in the bathtub, and returned to his apartment. There, he spent the day on his computer. He eventually returned to Lauren's apartment with a hacksaw. Without hesitation, he began wrapping the body parts in black bags and throwing them into various trash cans around the dormitory. He kept her torso for 2 more days before dumping it in a container outside the building, where police later discovered it. Stephen reported that within 48 hours of the crime, he had disposed of the mask and shirt stained with Lauren's blood. When questioned about the motive for the murder, he confessed to being obsessed with Lauren since they met. He revealed that he had been spying on her for months, using a setup to observe her without her noticing. Stephen also admitted that he had carefully researched methods to avoid detection. Thanks to this, he was able to use the master key he had stolen from the dormitory manager to enter Lauren's room. She was about to become a lawyer, something she had always dreamed of throughout her life. However, she had no idea that Stephen, who had been secretly watching her, would completely transform her life. After a trial in 2014, Stephen Mark McDaniel was convicted of a violent crime and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. After receiving the verdict, he began to do everything he could to regain his freedom. Despite admitting guilt, he maintained that he did not abuse Lauren. Stephen also shared with investigators his irrational belief that Lauren was still alive. He claimed to have a split personality, which he said made it difficult for him to explain his actions, yet he continued to follow his daily routine. He expressed feelings of remorse and stated that he missed Lauren greatly, but he understood that he could not expect forgiveness from her family. In 2018, Stephen's father set up an online fundraising page to hire a lawyer for his son's defense. However, the campaign was met with strong opposition from Lauren's family and friends, leading to its immediate cancellation. As a result, Stephen was forced to represent himself at the hearing. He argued that his rights were violated in the original sentence. Additionally, he criticized his previous lawyers for not defending him adequately, but his request for a review was denied. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Georgia and then to the Supreme Court of the United States, but both appeals were rejected. In January 2022, as well as in May and December of that year, he attempted to have his trial reviewed, but was unsuccessful. In January 2023, nearly 9 years after pleading guilty, he filed another appeal seeking to reduce his parole eligibility period. This time, he submitted a petition to the federal district court. But, as before, his appeal was denied. Stephen's mother struggled to accept the painful reality of her son's involvement in the murder. His grandfather expressed deep sadness, reflecting on the 25 years during which he had been proud of his grandson, but now found it hard to recognize him. During a visit to the facility where Stephen was held, the grandfather felt as if he were seeing a different person. Overwhelmed with despair, he left and chose not to visit Stephen again. Lauren's relatives found some comfort in the belief that Stephen would eventually realize the significance of his actions during his time in prison, which might lead to his repentance. Caitlin, her sister, honored Lauren by naming one of her daughters after her. The family continues to celebrate Lauren's birthday and maintains a tradition of wearing pink clothes on Wednesdays, just as Lauren had during her life. Lauren's tragic fate is a reminder of the importance of staying vigilant when sensing danger. In Lauren's case, the threat was not only visible but also close at hand, as she fell victim to someone who appeared harmless. This incident not only destroyed her dreams, but also broke the hearts of her loved ones.